example, is an analyst that uses on-chain data from Bitcoin to actually write analyst reports. And the thing about that is that's not a small thing, it's actually a big thing, because that's actually verifiable. You don't have to trust him as an advocate. You can go to the raw oracle, the on-chain data, to confirm what he's saying. You can link to a block explorer. Yeah, it's possible the block explorer could falsify it, but then you could actually go and clone the blockchain yourself and look at it, right? There's multiple block explorers, so you can double check, triple check what he's saying, right? So now the reporting has fundamentally changed because the raw data has fundamentally changed. It's censorship resistant, it's published pseudonymously, it's globally accessible, it's free, it's incorruptible. The raw data has vastly improved in quality. We've gone to the very base level. That's why crypto information, it's not a small thing for reporting on on-chain data. It's actually a very big thing. And then the third step in terms of regulation is, rather than just trusting one government, we have N. Right. So, it's a big world out there. The thing I put in the lower right corner, for example, Wyoming is smart enough on Ethereum and crypto and Bitcoin to have DAO legislation, right? Some governments will actually understand that the crypto information supply chain is better potentially than the legacy supply chain, if only because you can validate every single premise, right? You may or may not agree with the assertions at the base level, but you can see who made them, what time they made them. You can at least get facts, metadata about those assertions that you can verify, right? So this is a fiat information versus crypto information supply chain. And you might say, well, look, the COVID disaster is ongoing. It's already happened. How is like price stuff going to impact that? Well, that's a great question. So the first application, I think, of this, the first successful thing is going to be measuring inflation. Okay. This is the first application of the crypto information supply chain, because the official misinformation on COVID has already happened, but the official misinformation on inflation has begun, is about to begin. It starts with the CPI. It goes to, reporting. Back in May, the inflation scare doesn't match reality. Then a few months later, oh, well, actually, inflation is actually happening, but it's only temporary, right? The taper may start by year end, okay? And this is where policy is based on, in my view, false or at least questionable reporting and research, right? And these folks just don't have better data than that. Nobody has better data than that, because basically people will just say, oh, inflation looks like it's happening. The price of vegetables or the price of lumber and so on has gone up. People have individual snapshots that make them believe this. And often that intuition is correct, but it's not simply enough to, data is not the plural of anecdote. You need to actually systematically correct it. You need to essentially outcode, outreport, outresearch the folks who are claiming that inflation isn't happening, right? So this is something we're very well positioned for as a community, because essentially it proves everybody right. It proves Bitcoin people right. As an early Bitcoin holder, one of the things about it is inflation and seizure of assets. It proves Ethereum people right, because you're going to need a dApp and you're going to need a smart contract to actually calculate that inflation. It proves for folks like Chainlink, right? Because you're going to need crypto oracles to report that. It's a synthesis of many different pieces. It's going to probably lead to stablecoins. If you can actually calculate where things are inflating, you might be able to invert that to get a stablecoin. So for all these reasons, we are announcing a $100,000 competition at 1729.com/inflation. Chainlink is participating in this and is offering an additional $100,000 grant if you use Chainlink to code Decentralized inflation dashboard. So you can read all about it if you go to 1729.com/inflation. As I mentioned, I think this is a perfect test bed. It's important, but it's also just a price, or really just about prices. So it's like a small amount of information that carries with it a huge amount of importance. It proves everyone in crypto right in different ways, which is kind of funny, right? It's basically like the BTC narrative and the ETH narrative and the Chainlink narrative, and every narrative actually kind of has a piece of this, right? And a good dashboard would be refreshed 1 million times per day. Like, this is something where a truly decentralized inflation dashboard that's applicable not simply in the US or in China, but around the world, would be something that certainly people in Venezuela would look at. People would all around the world would look at. And it would be the next, in my view, the next CoinMarketCap, the next DeFi Pulse. It would probably be a pretty valuable thing in its own right. But it's also something which, sort of unites the clans, because we're going to need a bunch of different pieces. Bitcoin to hedge against that inflation, and decentralized apps, I think, to get the word out. So that's what we're doing. We've got this prize. It uses Chainlink, and it uses a bunch of different technologies there. We go through a lot of details on this in terms of how you'd actually potentially build this and some of the, gotchas. For example, scraping the data is possible, but it's not that easy to do. If you scraped a basket of goods, for prices over time, you have to be conscious of the fact that merchants are putting up various walls against scraping, trying to trick you in various ways. You can also try to partner with companies, to download the data. We think probably the best approach folks are very friendly to the concept of an inflation dashboard, and so you might get better quality data that way. So all of these details, you can go and read this, almost 3,000 word post. The competition is going to go for 90 days. Going to, email it and tweet about it. You guys are seeing it first. And Chainlink has graciously agreed to co-sponsor it with, as I mentioned, in addition, this $100,000 prize is for investment. Okay. And then there's a separate $100,000 grant in Link tokens if you use Chainlink. So go get them. asymmetry.com/inflation. And I can take any questions, I guess. Go ahead.
Balaji, thank you so much for coming on and discussing this. We will have plenty of additional resources about this for people who want to learn more about it. There's blog posts and tweets and such things coming out. But while I have you here just for a minute, let me ask you a couple of questions about this data. A little while ago, I've noticed on your feed, you've talked a lot about this information asymmetry. Is it really COVID that has kind of kicked this off? People have really noted that there's a lot here, or this goes back a little bit further? There's plenty of other examples as well.
Oh, absolutely. It goes back very far in time. In fact, there's this really amazing book called The Gray Lady Winked, which many people in crypto have read The Sovereign Individual, which is kind of about the future. It's a really good book. And The Gray Lady Winked is about the past. And it is, by an Israeli journalist, and it goes into how, the New York Times company has actually gotten not just that the COVID story wrong or the WMDs in Iraq story wrong, but they reported, for example, that Poland had invaded Germany in World War II. Okay, stuff like that, right? They'd gotten the Ukrainian famine. They'd covered that up. They had reported, misleadingly on Castro. They reported incorrectly that rockets would never happen. They said, 2 months before the Wright brothers' flight took off, that would never happen, and so on and so forth. So this issue has basically gone back very far. And so it's something where, the first step is kind of to get that undeletable history. And then we can start actually kind of going in retrospect. But if you want to see the depth of the problem, go get that book, The Gray Lady Winked. It's on Amazon now.
Awesome analysis. You're thinking on a global scale, really. Inflation is this massive sort of issue that has a massive data set. So you can pull data from a lot of different places, which is kind of necessary to this. One of the other issues in journalism is local journalism has declined recently. So people are having a harder time digging into their issues because there's not funding for whatever reason, for whether it's centralization in ownership of media platforms or whatever it happens to be. So is this a first step? And then if we can get this good data about inflation, what are some of those next sort of on the horizon places where we can find consensus and information?
It's a great question. And I think basically the reason inflation is so good is it's something where just the whole thing lines up. It's like a solar eclipse, right? Our community, the crypto community, has been culturally prepared for this for 10 years. It's not just about the technology. It's something where people are familiar with, for lack of a better term, this narrative that this can happen. And, it's something where, it's just a price, right? So it's something that, the price feed stuff that we've built, it's not that far to reach, right? Something like health data or something like that, that'd be a far reach, even if we can sort of know that, COVID misinformation was put out there. We don't yet have, good crypto genomic stuff. We don't yet, there's not that much health data out there. It's too much of a reach for the community at this point. But I think if with inflation, you can essentially have a better form of information than the fiat information supply chain out there now, then, generalizations are fairly straightforward. One obvious next step would be for all stock market kind of stuff to go on chain, because what you've essentially shown is that you can get better information than a government. right? You can get better information than, an academic researcher who's part of the establishment. I mean, there's lots of academic researchers, and some of them would actually like something like this. They would, the Billion Prices Project, for example, at MIT is really good. It's kind of an inspiration for this work we talk about in the post, where, as it sounds like, they just scraped 1 billion prices from the web as sort of a shadow statistics alternative to the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. And, the thing is that it's 2021. Do we think we can probably do better than the CPI? Yes. But the thing is that, it's something where if we don't do better, if we just kind of grumble and say, hey, prices are going up at the store, I don't believe this. Yeah, you can, in a sort of visceral way, just buy Bitcoin and protect yourself against that. And I think that's not a bad idea. That's like the meme, which has like the 50 IQ and 150 IQ guy like shaking hands, kind of like that. Like there's the low IQ way of dealing with this, right? Which is like, I don't trust the stats, let me just buy BTC. And that's actually a smart thing to do. And the high IQ way of doing it, which is I don't trust the stats, I'm going to buy BTC and I'm going to create better stats. And I think that's what we want to do. And it starts with that. And then it goes potentially to arbitrary corporate, or financial stats. If you can nail the inflation number better than the state, we can probably nail, revenue numbers, accounting, all that type of stuff, goes on chain.
I think on the screen, we're on the wrong side of the distribution. I think I need to be over there and you need to be. Not only is it low-hanging fruit for the crypto native people and for academics, that this grant, this inflation as the first piece, but also for financial service providers and traditional finance marketers. Like they're considering this as well. And now that there's these links between DeFi and financial services, price feeds, and all these things, it again is a nice combination there.
Yeah, that's right. And basically, you just kind of need one pretty good provider of, in a privacy preserving way of data, right? It could be somebody who has data on a lot of merchants. It could potentially be somebody who has anonymized transaction data, like, like a PayPal or a bank or something like that. You just need something where you can get a time series of a representative basket of goods, and the key is all of those things should be parameters and disclosable such that, as we discussed in the post, people can punch in their own basket of goods or have it like sort of read from data or something. I drive, I buy oranges, I use, computers, whatever. And then you see whether your personal basket of goods is going up or down in price. But in general, what it appears is that all the commodities like lumber and so on, those are rising in price because physical goods are scarce. The digital stuff will be flat or even down because, that's actually, the marginal cost of delivering another byte is not that much, but the marginal cost of delivering a block of lumber is quite a lot. So it may be something where we see physical inflation, digital flatness, or even digital deflation, and that will push people towards much, much less physical consumption, just staring into their screen all the time because that's really cheap. So I think that is actually a part of the future, but at least we can sort of call that out in advance, predict it, show that the state is actually wrong in its stats, and then maybe build something better.
And by, putting this call out to the community, there's you suggested, is there a better measure of CPI? Maybe there is. Inflation doesn't always happen unilaterally across society, right? Different social levels experience it very differently. So there's different indicators. Balaji, right. I could talk to you for hours about this, but I'm not going to. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us about this and taking a few questions at the end. Again, the resources to go find information about the project will be available online. Follow everything on Twitter. And I appreciate you coming very much.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Everybody, we are going to take a 5-minute break in between now and our next presentation as our presenters get ready and we get all of the slides and everything in order. So stick with us. This is SmartCon 2021, SmartCon number 1. Again, I'm Andy Boyan. Come back very soon. Stay here. In fact, you stay here. I will come back very, very soon and introduce our next presenters. Again, thank you to Balaji for coming on and giving that great presentation. Everybody, welcome back. I've got an exciting panel for you today. It's a Q&A session with some friends of mine. Alexander Leonard Larson from Axie Infinity will be speaking. Axie has been mentioned a couple of times today already, and so now let's get into a Q&A. So up next, right now, we have Alexander Leonard Larson from Axie Infinity and journalist Andrew Thurman.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, as Andy said, he joined here today with Alexander Leonard Larson. He's the co-founder and COO of Axie Infinity, and Sky Mavis, who are the creators of Axie Infinity. First, Alex, I want to congratulate you. Axie is just on this unbelievable run right now. For the month of July, the game generated $196 million in revenues. That is up from just $100,000 in revenues for the month of January this year. You can do the math on the percentage there, but it is insane. Daily active users are nearing 1 million. Axie is comfortably the most successful NFT game, and Ronin is the most active ETH sidechain, Ronin being Axie's ETH sidechain, for NFTs. I think a lot of people knew that Axie had room to grow, that play to earn was real. But this is explosive expansion. I don't think anybody could have predicted this. What do you think the primary cause is? Is there one, like some reason that you're particularly proud of? How did this come to happen in such a short time frame?
Hi, Andrew, and thanks for having me here at SmartCon. So, yeah, everything you said there is correct. It's been a pretty wild ride the past couple of months, but you know, from our point of view, it's just getting started. I mean, the game that people are playing right now, we originally released it early in 2020, and there was just a significant amount of pent-up demand because the current battle game is actually also dependent on the breeding game, which then was dependent on Ethereum. So there was all this pent-up demand from people who actually wanted to play the battle game. The current player base that we had, they loved it. But they couldn't breed new Axies without leaking a significant amount of, maximum extractable value to the miners on Ethereum. So that's why we created the Ronin sidechain. And once that was released, well, that's really when we started to see, this insane run that's happened. So for us, that what that tells us is that there is a significant amount of demand to play these type of NFT or play to earn games, and there is a massive opportunity to introduce crypto to the mainstream by playing games, basically. And that's what we believed in since the beginning, right? That's when we founded our company early 2018. We felt that there's an opportunity here. It's going to take some time, but we didn't really understand just how long it would take to get to this point. So, I mean, when we got started, there wasn't even DeFi. There wasn't really much of anything. Everyone had this belief that probably games and DeFi, some of these things are going to find product market fit. But, these latest numbers just tell us that if you can truly find product market fit, it's going to go pretty crazy, pretty fast.
Right. And yeah, I think you can see that, right? But just as impressive as the sort of internal metrics are some softer metrics that might be a little bit tougher to track. the ecosystem around Axie seems to be growing just as much as the game itself. You have full-time streamers now like Bryce Cent, who are making a real name for themselves, almost 50K followers on Twitter. And Axie is nearing top 50 games streamed on Twitch, which I think is just a stunning number. There's real-world interest coming now. And you also have things like Yield Guild Games, another third party which provided scholarships to help users get over the initial cost barrier to playing. How important are these third-party contributions, and is there one in particular you want to shout out?
Wow. Yeah, I'll try to not shout out a specific content creator because it makes all of the other ones that we have a little bit jealous. But there are too many to say specifically. Actually, I love to see how many amazing artists we have, for example, who are making amazing art pieces. They make memes. And that's the one of the things that helps spread Axie Infinity outwards. It's not only the game. Like Axie Infinity is a combination of both game and community and economy. So the community, they touch on all of these things, like artists, that's more on the community side specifically. And then you have businesses like Yield Guild Games, who are creating their own scholarships and other guilds that are in there. So they've been tremendously important in actually going to market in various jurisdictions because it's quite expensive to get started playing Axie right now. So what these guilds actually do, some of them had many Axies from before it got expensive, and then they're kind of distributing them out to many different accounts, and then they are onboarding players like that. So it's sort of like a light franchise model, which I don't think anyone could actually foreseen, because everyone was like, oh, Axie Infinity is too expensive, we're just not going to start to play at all. But then you see that the community actually finds solution to because it's basically created using our existing account system that enables these scholarships. So we don't only have that, but we also have game developers who want to make Axie Infinity games, and that's one of the opportunities for NFTs. And in general, when I see all of these profile picture, projects that are popping up in the ETH space right now, I'm like, wow, this is perfect for, other games in the future. And that's also, kind of where we started in Axie. We had these NFT game assets that, we had the idea that we wanted to put them in various games, and then eventually just started building. So I think in the next couple of years, it's going to be super exciting. And in Axie, of course, we even have podcasts. I think there are up to 5-6 different Axie podcasts that are specifically tailored to the Axie community. So it's just great to see how fast things are growing there. But everything is coming from this, early traction that we had, that solid foundation. That pretty much the only way to do that is to, keep building through a bear market, because that's when you find the true believers, the evangelists. It's quite similar to what, actually Chainlink did the last bear market.
That's a great comparison. I love that. 6 podcasts as well. That's an insane figure. Let's talk a little bit about the FUD then. I think a lot of Axie's success comes from this really elegantly designed economic flywheel. New users coming in drive demand for the Axies. That then drive demand for Small Love Potion, which you need to breed more Axies, and that leads to yields from the game as players earn by doing in-game activities, which then, of course, brings new users in. However, it seems like that flywheel stalls out if there isn't this constant explosive user growth. I'm wondering how the game maintains momentum when user numbers begin to contract, and how can the economy continue to flourish in more adverse circumstances?
Yeah, it's a very common question, and I totally understand why people have some concerns around this, right? For us, it's totally fine to be growth focused for now. So we see Axie Infinity as more than a game. It's actually a network where the more players that we have in the network, the more connections they are making with each other, and actually the more value that's being generated inside the network. So that's why we can afford to give these tokens out for a period of time, while Axie Infinity is growing. But at the same time, what happens if we have too many Axies that exist in the ecosystem? Well, we need to find ways that we can basically give them more utility. So everything is tied to the utility of the Axies. The more games you have created in your ecosystem, the more players will want to hold onto the Axies or potentially use them. And those use cases, well, some of them might be even releasing Axies into the wild so that you actually reduce the supply. So that's something that we have, spent a lot of time thinking about. about, and it's not something that we are too concerned about right now, because I would say maybe only 15% when it comes to the development of Axie Infinity and how this game can evolve over time. Of course, this is something that, let's say that we would prefer if there wasn't such insane rallies in prices, just because it's always better, kind of in our opinion, that it goes just slightly up and up and up and up, rather than this very bubbly and then it crashes a little bit. So we're trying to keep more of to trail the economy a little bit and then react if we see that things are getting out of hand. So sort of like the invisible hand, just not quite the same way.
Can you that's a really interesting point, and I'm curious how you approach something like that. Is this simply by introducing new features that also serve as a kind of economic policy making? The new mini games themselves can have an economic impact, right? So when you talk about potentially curbing growth, does that come from these hypothetical Axie burn mechanisms? Can you give us a little insight, maybe an example of what an economic policy enacted in Axie might look like?
Yeah, a very easy one would be when we are looking at the SLP issuance that a player can earn every day, right? There is a set amount of SLP that they can make, but if we want to reduce the pressure, the sell pressure on SLP, we can basically reduce the amount of SLP that they can earn per day, and then at the same time we can also increase the amount of SLP that's required to breed. Of course, these are very things that we need to be very careful with. If not, people lose faith in the currency as a whole. So yeah, that's a very easy way for us to change things.
Really interesting. Changing topics a little bit here, I want to talk about the metaverse a touch more broadly. Something that's been nagging me recently is that a lot of the new projects, perhaps Axie competitors that are starting to come out, they always talk about building a metaverse, which in its language seems to me to be fundamentally antithetical to the notion of the metaverse, which is supposed to be this persistent universe that's fully interoperable across multiple game worlds and can overcome licensing and IP barriers. You touched on this a little bit, talking about folding in profile pick projects, bringing in third-party developers. I'm curious how Axie is approaching bringing in outside content and whether or not, Lunasha's borders will remain closed.
Yeah, another good question. I think we have to go back a little bit to answer this question. When we started Axie, we were very collaborative. I mean, Axie NFTs, they were initially purely on Ethereum, so we could collaborate very easily with the other project. And we even did that. What it turned out that it takes a lot of development time, and it's actually sort of a distraction until you have found that user base that it actually makes sense to collaborate with existing projects. So we actually took a step back and decided that we're just going to focus on our core, belief and what we think we need to do, and that is to make a good game and a good project so that we can actually get many users in that aren't already inside crypto. And that's exactly what we're doing. So we're making a fun game, and then these players, they come in to play Axie Infinity, and then eventually we can take them on a journey where they can play many, many different games, and then eventually take part in a broader Axie Infinity game universe where you can do many different things. So that's how we view the world at first, and then eventually, who knows if we can open that up to other IPs in the future, or even, it's natural that people will be able to use their Axies in other games as well. They are NFTs, they should be open. So that's definitely coming. But for now, we're in this kind of hybrid state where we actually need to take care of the current user base that we have and just be laser focused on that. So we don't spend precious developer resources on other things. And I think this metaverse meme where everyone is bringing it in, well, I actually think it's going to come from the community first. And it makes perfect sense to me that it would be a group of crypto whales who have a lot of money, who've made money in Ether or maybe in some other project before, and they've learned some things. And then they come at it from a more altruistic perspective where you actually want to provide a service for the entire ecosystem. The real challenge there is, how do you actually balance out the value of each profile picture project or Axie or Punk, or how strong should they be inside that meta universe, and what is the gamified way to participate in the meta universe? Because people don't only want to being social is a part of it, but people also want to do something. You can't just be social. You have to I play a game, or there has to be some kind of mission. So I think we're very a few years out of that actually happening.
But it sounds like that's certainly on the roadmap. And, if an outside developer was willing to do the legwork, that's something that Axie would be open to.
Yeah, I mean, so we want to open up Axie Infinity, the game universe, so that people can make their own Axie Infinity games and put that on top of Axie Infinity Land. I mean, that's the first step. In the future, using Axie assets for other type of games, I mean, that could happen as well. It's just not something that we see as very feasible in the very short term, because there's so much on the infrastructure side that still needs to be built out. And all of these challenges in terms of what is composability, and I mean, these are challenges in DeFi, but in NFT world, it's just people are just starting to realize that, wow, this is actually going to be a major challenge.
Yeah, I think it's easy to look for the future and imagine what you want, but not kind of overlook the technical hurdles. Speaking more a little bit about the metaverse, though, I think you now have a big competitor coming onto the scene, to put it lightly. Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg, CEO over there, announced in a video he sent to employees that the social media giant is pivoting to become a metaverse company within the next 5 years. So far, he's playing nice. He's publicly said that Facebook will work in tandem with other companies and entities to build out the metaverse. But I think many people rightfully fear that they'll become these digital land barons in a walled garden. How does Axie, how does the permissionless metaverse compete and win against the giant like Facebook?
Yeah, I actually retweeted this today by one of the co-founders from Foundation. His name is Kayvon, and he said, and I totally agree with it, he said that it's increasingly clear that big tech will attempt to co-opt the term metaverse. So in my opinion, we should fight for the integrity of the word and what defines a metaverse. Like, those will be that the digital items and the digital objects belongs to the people, and that they are portable. They can be used across many different games, for example, or many different applications, and that they actually hold some value. Now, I have serious doubts that Facebook or any other, big tech company will want to share all that value, because why would they? They are making money on us, right? They are making money on selling our identity, our data. So, I mean, I'm not so worried that they will succeed, because I hope that people are getting smarter. And that they will be able to see, the true benefits of something like Axie and other decentralized applications where you truly own your game assets. And that's the way it should be. It's just, once the genie is out of the bottle, it's really hard to put it back. So they might try it, but I don't think it's going to happen.
I agree, and I hope that's the case. Last quick one, because we're running out of time here. It's been a pleasure talking with you. But a lot of the things that we touched on today would ideally be these major decisions would ideally be done by a DAO. Deciding on how much SLP emissions there are, choosing partnered projects. How quickly is Axie going to move towards full governance decentralization? And is that another sort of long-term roadmap, or are there clear objectives on the horizon?
Yeah, so we take a very, how can I say it, pragmatic approach to decentralization. I mean, our idea here is we actually need to make sure that there is a stable foundation first, and then eventually we can start to progress into decentralization from there. So how long it's going to take specifically, I mean, I think we could talk even a decade until Axie Infinity is fully decentralized. The reason for that is because making a game is really, really hard, especially when you're building on bleeding edge tech, and when you are trying to put all these pieces together, like not only the economy, the community, everything that's around a game like this, and even working with the larger, the larger game studios in the world, or the larger distribution platforms. So that actually there needs to be a core team in place. It's a little bit different from a DeFi application where you can actually just put a smart contract out there. I mean, we could decentralize the marketplace contract right now, but that wouldn't mean Axie was decentralized. So pragmatic approach first. Let's make something that people love and then care, and then have a clear roadmap that this will be decentralized, and that's going to be happening through a token. I think that's what we're willing to commit to at this point.
Great to hear. Well, Alexander, thank you for your time. I'm sure you're incredibly busy building comfortably the world's largest and most impressive play-to-earn platform. Really appreciate you taking the time with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andrew, and thanks for letting me come on to SmartCon once again to the Chainlink team, and I can see Sandeep is coming up, so should be very interesting to hear what he has to say as well. Okay, thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Andrew and Alexander. Always great to hear from Axie and about their incredible community as well. So up next, we've got Polygon. We're excited to hear from Sandeep Nailwall. So everyone hang on. We're going to continue SmartCon 2021. So Sandeep, the floor is yours in just one moment. You're on, Sandeep. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, guys. I'm Sandeep. I'm one of the co-founders at Polygon ecosystem. At Polygon Technology, and I take care of the the business side of and the ecosystem side of the things. And this session is focused around getting to give everyone an update on where Polygon is, and especially also focusing more on because it's been still like 6, 7, 8 months since we kind of expanded from Matic Network to Polygon. So conveying the idea of Polygon and what we are going to do over there. So first off, like, what exactly is Polygon, right? So previously, if you see, we were building, if you can see my pointer on the screen, that we were doing with Matic Network, we were doing building a Plasma, which is one kind of scalability solution for Ethereum. And what we realized along our journey is that there is no one solution fits all for all the people who want to build on blockchains. Secondly, not everyone is looking for same trade-off. Some people want more scalability, and then they are okay with little bit of less security and decentralization. Not like a complete lack of it, but little bit less on the spectrum. We say decentralization is a spectrum. And then similarly, there would be some other players who would want extreme decentralization and extreme security because of the, let's say, high value being traded on their application. So, and then there will be some enterprises who would want like complete separate chain for themselves, and they want to, use it for their applications and whatnot, and need privacy and whatnot. So it was very clear in our mind because, as many people would know, that Polygon today, after Ethereum, is the most adopted solution in terms of the number of applications that are building in the whole world right now. And like from all the blue chips of DeFi to gaming and metaverses and whatnot, like most of the applications that you would see, they would have a Polygon store already. So we are very well known for adoption, and we have been speaking to so many developers over the last many years. And we realized that in order to create a long-lasting protocol which is used by a huge number of developers, we need to cater to multiple demands, right? So that's when we expanded from Matic Network to this whole diagram that you see as Polygon, which is a multi-chain, Ethereum's multi-chain ecosystem. Basically, there will be the thesis is that Ethereum is eventually going to be the ultimate settlement layer, and on top of it, you will have these various constellations or various kind of chains who will be connecting directly back into Ethereum. And we have actually, already announced or kind of delivered multiple of our solutions. We are, for example, our proof of stake and Plasma chain, which is like extremely adopted. We also launched the Polygon SDK, with which the developers can launch their own chains. We recently announced a data availability chain, which is going to be very crucial as the layer 2 rollups become more and more mainstream, and in order to reduce the transaction cost on those rollups, because they have to commit data back to Ethereum, which can be very, very costly. So data availability chain. Similarly, on the enterprise side, there is a lot of things going on, and one of our biggest bets as a platform would be on the zero knowledge technology, where we believe that in the next 2 to 3 months, the homework that we have done in the last 5 to 6 months we will be one of the powerhouses of zero knowledge technology and research in the space. Essentially, if you want to think of Polygon, it's basically an aggregator for multiple scaling solutions. It can, cater to various different kinds of, decentralized execution demands for the developers. So that's about the technology and what we are building. And our journey has been pretty long, and we started in 2017, and we did our IEO on Binance on 2019, and then our mainnet was launched in 2020. And since then, there has been a huge wave of adoption. And some marquee investors like Mark Cuban and all that invested in Polygon. We recently announced the Polygon SDK, and Polygon Studios also was announced, which is specifically our division to focus on gaming and NFTs. And as you would already know, in terms of the Web3 gaming, many of the, unfortunately, we don't have Axie. But apart from Axie, like if you see the number 2, number 3, number 4, like many of those, in the top 10, you would see many of those applications use today Polygon as their home for their scalability needs. And we believe that this will keep going up, especially in the Web3 gaming. I'm pretty sure if you speak to 10 different games, a random set of 10 different games in the space, you will hear from, probably 6 or 7 that they are using Polygon for their scalability needs. And then in our Q4, we expect to launch Polygon Avail, full launch of Polygon Avail data availability chain. And apart from that, rollups and, standalone chains, like more secured and more, kind of robust versions of the standalone chains. Basically, the goal is to convert Ethereum into this multi-chain ecosystem, which caters to the needs of dApps and as well as settlement requirements. Some of these stats might be a bit older, and the markets have also, changed. But, we already have 500 plus dApps onboarded. And if I include the number of applications which are already building on the platform, it would go into probably now 4 digits. Probably north of 1,000, because there are just so many applications building on Polygon. The DeFi TVL, I had checked a few days back. It was like around $8.5 to $10 billion, and depending upon market conditions, it keeps going up and down. We have around 7 million plus transactions every day. Which includes like many of the blue chip applications and all that, and many of them like Compound, Aave, and Aave, and many of the other protocols use for example, Chainlink very heavily for their DeFi protocols, and we are seeing a large number of such applications. Recently, 0x protocol also announced their stats. They have done, I think, $1 billion plus in the transactions in the last 3, 4, or 4, 5, 6 weeks since they launched. We are fairly decentralized. I would say that in terms of Ethereum secondary layer solutions, Polygon is probably the most decentralized with 100 plus validators. And the market cap also, although is keeps changing, we are around this one. And then some of the stats you want to see, that number of user wallets and the transaction costs and everything. The key differentiators of Polygon is like basically we focus very heavily on the user experience, and we are very long on Ethereum ecosystem, so we keep all our solutions very ETH compatible and interoperable. And then the main reason is that basically to provide these multiple scaling frameworks for the developers, which they can easily use for their solutions. And then this is basically a snapshot of our ecosystem. I think like there is now an updated version of this, which is even more overwhelming. There's like just a huge number of applications and ecosystem providers, and we also believe in creating a production ready chain. So we take pride in having that. And we today, if you see in terms of the wallets, most of the wallets support Polygon. Most of the tooling providers, for example, Infura, which provides the RPC for MetaMask, and I think Ethereum is Polygon is the second chain after Ethereum, which for which they are providing RPC solutions. Alchemy and all the other big players in the space provide RPC solutions to Polygon. Similarly, on the on-ramp, like fiat on-ramp, almost all the top players have launched native on-ramps. And the biggest thing is also all the top tier exchanges, including Binance, Huobi, OKEX, and much more are coming in the future. They all have natively integrated Polygon mainnet. So you don't even need to exit to Ethereum. You can move your funds into exchanges and move in and out just via the Polygon mainnet itself. So these are some of the highlights from our side, and hope it was informative for you guys for Polygon ecosystem. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sandeep. Appreciate your time here. I have questions as always. So let me ask you one real quick while we have you. You mentioned native on-ramps, how many projects are building these already. Is that what you guys are seeing? What are you seeing more of? People coming from a bridge like Ethereum or onto some of these native on-ramps, or is it too early to tell really yet?
Yeah. So see, if you go by the traffic right now, of course, the larger traffic is via the main bridge, because that's where the massive amounts come in. But what the help of these on-ramp solutions is basically, especially for the gaming and NFT use cases, where the developers want to provide lucid experiences where the user doesn't even know. Like we always keep saying that one of our goals by providing this tooling is to make blockchain invisible. So on-ramps is a very important part in that, where as a user you are playing a game and you're swiping your card, you buy some NFT, you do purchases, play to earn, and those kind of things. You kind of earn more stuff, and then you have off-ramp where you can directly take your money off the platform, right? So I mean, those are the things, those are the user experiences we want to achieve with the level of tooling available on Polygon.
While I have you here, you mentioned multiple scaling options for developers, and you also mentioned composability. In your team's longer-term vision, are those things that stack that developers will use multiple of, or is it like pick and choose one, or do you have a vision of that yet?
Yes. So we believe that all these scaling technologies are going to be commoditized, like you have, let's say, on AWS as a developer. When you go, you have various different kind of server technology, operating systems on which you can launch and build your applications. We believe that all these infrastructure technologies are going to be eventually commoditized. And what we are building is basically a one-stop shop for a decentralized shop in that sense for the developer, where developer can simply, come and based on some parameters, he gets to know that, okay, this is the most appropriate platform for me, whether it can be a standalone chain or it can be a public chain, which has, integrations to exchanges and whatnot. And then he simply goes ahead and deploys that. The next level thing, which could be at least like a few years away, the next level thing could be where people are able to build these interfaces where developer simply comes and presents his code and all that, builds his code and simply says, okay, these are my parameters, deploy. And the developer doesn't even need to know where exactly the code is getting deployed, which solution is being used, as far as it fulfills their trade-offs. And that would be like the kind of the super cycle of a developer adoption. But I think that's pretty far away. But in the short run, yes, developers will be able to choose based on parameters which solution suits them most.
It's okay by me to talk a couple years out, because I got into crypto a couple years ago, and now the things that everyone was excited about, cross-chain compatibility, layer 2 solutions, those are real, and you can transact. You can bridge to Polygon, and you can track on, do transactions. So stuff does come to fruition. London upgrade just happened, so those things do happen, even if they take some time. Sandeep, thank you so much for coming and presenting this vision of Polygon and the Polygon ecosystem. When games go live on Polygon or any project, send them to me. I want to talk to them as well, so we can feature them on some YouTube channels and things as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here.
Our pleasure. Everybody, we are going to take another short break as we prepare for a special presentation from Sergey Nazarov, co-founder of Chainlink. I'm sure you all are excited. So stick with us, listen to this fantastic intermission music. People are commenting on it and jamming. So put your headphones on and jam with me as we get ready for an upcoming session. We'll be right back. Welcome back. And thank you to all the presenters and panels that have gone previously at SmartCon 2021. But without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce co-founder of Chainlink, Sergey Nazarov, with a special guest.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm thrilled to be joined by Jonathan Ehrenfeld, who's responsible for security strategies at Swift. Jonathan is, one of the most thoughtful people I know from the institutional finance world. And he's had a lot of background in both how securities infrastructure evolves over time and how, blockchains and other systems might be able to fit into that. So I'm truly thrilled that he can join us and share his genuinely insightful point of view. Thank you very much for speaking with me here at the conference, Jonathan.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Thank you. My first question is, and this is, one of the topics we discuss once in a while, and I'm sure everyone would be thrilled to hear your point of view as well, is how do you see global financial infrastructure evolving over the years to come? And what role do you think blockchains might possibly play in that evolution?
Right. So, Swift is sort of at the center of the financial industry, right? We do have conversations almost every day with big investment banks, asset managers, market infrastructures, and it's part of our role. It's also part of my role personally. And so we follow these trends sort of as quickly or as rapidly as any big consulting firm. And so, but I will try to do some sort of personal opinion about it. So I think, first of all, financial services industry needs to catch up, right? If you think about how they work today, it's sort of, we continue to be in a hybrid mode where you have a big mixture of digital and very analog processes, right? So we haven't made the choice between digital or traditional assets. There's still paper-based assets. We haven't made the choice about automated or manual processes or workflows. So you cannot imagine the number of faxes that you continue to see in the financial industry. Even, I'm not talking about small firms, but about big firms. And then I don't think there's still a clear line between what are the things that today are done on premises versus the things that are done on the cloud. And those are things that some other industries that are as big or as important as financial services have made the choice to move to the cloud, to be fully digital and fully automated. It doesn't make sense that financial services continues to be in sort of that 50% of processes that are in one or the other. So that's one thing. The second, I do think that more than ever, asset managers and wealth managers and pension funds, everybody that is very close to people, because market infrastructures and custodians and brokers are not really serving people, right? They are serving corporates, they are serving institutional investors, or they are working for the asset managers. So I do think that is a big role for the asset managers, the pension funds that are actually working with the money of actual people. I would say that you have seen in the last few years a real focus on new customer demands, and those customer demands are, the same that you see in other industries. It's you need to be green, you need to be socially responsible, you need to have the right corporate governance, you need to invest in responsible innovation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think banks, asset managers, pension funds, everybody in the industry will need to go and know their customers again, because we think we know our customers, but I don't think we do. And one of the big shifts that will happen is that a lot of the millennial generation, which I'm part of, and a lot of the generation that is coming afterwards, is going to inherit a lot of money from grandparents and from their parents. And these people, all these millennials are not going to invest in the same products, are not going to invest their money in the same way that their parents or grandparents did. So if banks don't change that, and if the pension funds and asset managers don't change that, this is going to be a hard time for them. And I don't think it's just about just having an ESG fund and saying this is green. I do think it's going to be more than that. So that is something that will be nice to see. And the last thing is that there is the right combination of drivers today. There's enough regulation, there's enough cost pressure, there's enough technology, there's enough sort of digital models coming out, and that is going to accelerate the shift and the change for the industry to be better. And I think, we don't like to use a lot about the pandemic because it's just 1 year or a year and a half, but the volumes that we have seen in our network and the volumes that our customers have been able to cope just shows that, this is not going down, and this industry is still there to stay for a long time.
Makes sense. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, the second part of your question was how do you see blockchains playing a role in this system? Which, for me, it's not the role that blockchain will play. I think it's everything around blockchain, right? Blockchain is one technology, and as one technology, you can compare it to any other technology that has come into place. I think it's everything around it. There are elements that are blockchain based or that are part of the blockchain environment, which are truthfully interesting for us, right? One is the fact that assets could be digitalized, and we can talk about it later about what does that mean. Smart contracts. It's so basic but so important that in the past we used to have future or options that were not programmable. With smart contracts, just be able to define prices, to define conditions based on anything that you want, and define it in such a standardized and simple way. And then the fact that you can also have programmable money or cryptocurrencies, that those three things are smart contracts, digital assets, and cryptocurrencies, which are part of the whole blockchain hype, will probably have unprecedented impact into the industry. And we can discuss further. But I do think it's not blockchain itself, but everything around it.
Right. So when you say everything around it, I think you mean all the value and utility people get from what they can do on a blockchain, right? Like all the outcomes they can get from it.
Yeah. And I think if you break down blockchains as being, all right, there is a smart contract component, there is a digital asset component, and there is the cryptocurrency component. Those three things are more important in combination or independently than that blockchain as a whole.
Got it. Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's not just a matter of here's a blockchain and it holds some kind of state on chain and that's great and that's it, we're done.
Yeah,
I think you're absolutely right that it has to create a smart contract, it has to create a real world settlement, it has to create some kind of valuable transaction in ways that wouldn't be possible before. So I completely agree with you.
Yeah. And on my side, now that we're talking about blockchain, right? And this is something you and I would have discussed many times in the past, but blockchain is going to use many new technologies and new infrastructures, but how do you see like existing infrastructure, right? Any infrastructure that exists today or that has been there for a while, how do you see that interfacing with blockchain today?
Yeah, so I think that my point of view on this for many, many years now, I think for over 4 or 5 years now, has really been that you already have PKI systems, private key signing systems. You already have messaging standards. You already have a lot of interfaces that people have built within banks. Those interfaces then flow up into other user-focused applications. You have a lot of infrastructure that can essentially send digital commands, right? So if they're not cryptographically signed commands that could be input into a blockchain, that's their only real limitation, right? You can still define a lot of interactions digitally. And so that level of digital interaction is something that already exists and is something that a lot of people are trained on. And there's a lot of systems like Swift that already enable that very well. And so my point of view has always been that you should use the systems today that work well for what they do well. And then you should allow the additional properties of blockchains and smart contracts and oracles to be added to that. Because what you're really trying to do is create a stack with focused components. And if a part of that stack already exists and can already sign messages using some kind of PKI or some kind of messaging system or standard like Swift's messaging system and standard, then that's fine, right? That's not the necessarily the innovation of blockchains or the innovation of smart contracts. The innovation of blockchains and smart contracts is these cryptographically guaranteed agreements, these cryptographically guaranteed state changes to settle transactions and move value and control all of these critical things in a transparent way. But the actual ability to send a command to those systems can absolutely come from a digital system, right? So it can come from a system that already has some kind of HSM infrastructure to hold private keys, some kind of PKI scheme to sign transactions and put them into a system that can possibly reformat them into many different blockchain transaction types. And this direction to me just seems like the most efficient direction, because you already have a very large part of the world that uses these standards, uses this PKI, uses this private key signing infrastructure. And if we as a community, as the blockchain community, really want to see blockchains and smart contracts adopted as the state storage and contractual mechanism, then we want as many systems as possible influencing that and being able to interface and enact those types of systems, right? To enact the useful aspects of smart contracts, for settlement, for transactions, for whatever they can be used for, global trade or securities or whatever topics.
Yeah.
And yeah, so my point of view is that the existing infrastructure can absolutely and should absolutely be used using the existing PKI and the existing messaging standard of systems like Swift.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, not everybody is sort of on the industry that we all are, and all the fintech companies has realized that, right? That the fact of using existing infrastructure and very old technology like PKI that you were mentioning, just messaging, it's not about just starting from scratch and building on top of a white paper. You need to build on something that already exists, and the fact that PKI certificates and a messaging network is used by, I think today we're more about 12,000 users today. It's not something that you will be able to achieve just by starting with a blank sheet of paper.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Jonathan, when you say 12,000 users, I've always understood that's 12,000 actual banks. So that's the vast majority of the world's banks. So
it is
right, and each of those banks then represents hundreds of thousands or millions of individual users, and that's really the user base that on the front end is using Swift through the back end relationships that the banks have. So I really don't see that the interfacing or the messaging standard for digital commands or the ability to have a PKI that signs transactions securely through an HSM or some other private key secure storage model is what needs to be innovated here. It can definitely be innovated on. It can definitely be improved. There's multi-sig. There's a number of great security properties that you can get from improving PKI and increasing its security, which I know you guys are always thinking about in great detail. But the reality is that isn't the innovation of blockchains, right? The innovation of blockchains is all those useful outcomes you described. And I think if we're able to, I think really if we as an industry are able to interface with all the useful systems out in the world, we can actually make blockchains and smart contracts useful for everybody much, much faster.
Correct.
Because the fundamental goal, once again, isn't reinventing the user interface the user interface isn't going to change. It's going to be on the web. It's going to be a website. It's going to be a bank middle office application that sends a digital command, through some message routing, probably using Swift Alliance access to trigger something somewhere, right? Those things don't necessarily need to change. The thing that needs to change is where that goes and where that ends up as a final state and as a transparent way to settle and as a transparent way to do global trade and all these other things. So I think there's just this kind of idea that somehow there's all of these goals, just reinvent everything. I think if you have a very focused goal and you want to reinvent how the system works on the back end, then the interfaces that can plug into that back end and allow it to be more adopted more quickly is actually a huge accelerant for its adoption, right? And that's always how I've intuitively viewed this. So from your point of view, Jonathan, how do you see DeFi, decentralized finance, evolving to become included in the global financial system? And what do you think needs to happen for DeFi to become included in that global financial system?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, right? Because I think in the end, much of that depends on who finds DeFi useful and why they find it useful, right? I think many people believe that any DeFi project, it's going to draw a lot of users, right? And that means that, any application makes financial services a little bit more inclusive, a little bit more democratic for more people to have access to such platforms, and think about what Robinhood did a few months ago. So I think in that sense, that idea of democratization rather than decentralization, it's probably where the success of DeFi will come from. What is interesting about DeFi too is that sort of when we're talking about blockchain is that DeFi sort of expands the usage of a blockchain beyond just the transfer of value, right? And a lot of the applications that are being built on DeFi today are touching, core parts of the securities industry or the financial industry, like loans, insurance, or parts that are derivatives, or parts that are more retail oriented, like, crowdfunding, betting technologies, etc., which in most cases use like a central control power, and this decentralization sort of changes the game. And one of the things that will take, of course, in my opinion, for this to be accelerated and to be adopted and to be integrated into the full ecosystem, I think one thing would be for the regulator to sort of, put some sort of canvas to it. And I think that has happened already, at least in the US. So you have the SEC recently has approved a few DeFi companies or environments to work. I think the latest one was Arca, which is an Ethereum-based technology that was approved by the SEC. So it's a fund in the end, and Arca is fully based on DeFi. The second thing is it's how asset managers are going to use it, because coming back to my point that I was making before, for me, asset managers are the main actors of the industry, right? They are the ones driving how things change. They are the ultimate customer of the big banks. And so they are an important piece of the puzzle. And if they start to take DeFi seriously, that is going to change the game. And I think the most prominent recent case on DeFi being adopted by asset management is the foundation of Grayscale, which I think it's now sort of the largest crypto fund, right? And I think that's an interesting. Now, one thing that I would say that DeFi needs to do, and it's probably not DeFi as a whole, but I think everybody that is writing blogs or talking about DeFi in conferences and articles and papers, etc., is this idea of trying to cut the middleman. Every time you come with the idea that let's get rid of banks, let's get rid of greedy corporates, and let's just cut the middleman and make the middleman disappear. That's not the primary advantage of DeFi. And to be honest, I mean, if you cut the middleman, another middleman will come. So I don't think that should be the pitch. The pitch should not be about cutting that sort of big bad wolf. It should be about what are the advantages that DeFi have, more on the democratization side, the access for everybody, and to be able to participate in the industry, which is not inclusive today, but trying to get rid of banks or trying to get rid of central infrastructures just for the sake of it, I don't think it's going to be the pitch that will save them.
Yeah, when I look at this, go ahead.
No, that was it.
When I look at this, I really see a number of existing institutions, whether those are banks or asset managers or fintechs, that have a user base, right? And they basically have a user base that they have so far been curating assets for and catering to well in the current kind of digital securities environment, right? And what I think is very natural, and I think has already started to actually happen through PayPal offering the purchase of cryptocurrency. I think really that's the thing that kicked a lot of this off and made a lot of people kind of stand up and go, well, if something of that size starts to offer this as a key piece of real estate on their interface, then there must be some kind of future here. And so I don't necessarily think that every single middleman and every single participant in the current global financial system is just going to, poof and disappear and just become obsolete and irrelevant. I think all of these, fintechs and banks and all of these and the digital banks that are coming out now because the hurdles to making a bank are getting less and less and less. I think all of those market participants really just have a new market to go after. And the ones that go after that market successfully will see the benefits of going after that market successfully. And that's really just a simple way to look at it, right? If I already have a fintech application, if I already have a bank relationship and that bank offers me access to internet banking 20 years ago or 10 years ago, then I stay with that bank because they have internet banking. And if it doesn't offer me internet banking and I need internet banking to pay my bill or do whatever I need to do, then I stop using that bank, right? And that's just kind of the simple reality that I think is going to be much more fundamental than, are you a bad middleman? Are you a good middleman? I think fundamentally capitalism just forces people to adapt. And it's going to force the large institutions, the asset managers, the digital banks, the fintechs, everybody who wants to own a user relationship, it's going to force them to adapt to all this. And I think that adaptation will actually come in two forms. It'll come in the form of them needing to interface with all of these systems. So they're going to need to interface. And in the more advanced institutions, in the larger places that already have an existing infrastructure, they are going to want to do that through their existing systems. So I think at the end of the day, it's about the fundamental value of our industry that and the demand that generates from consumers, and then the banks and the fintechs and everyone else in the global financial system that gets behind that and provides an interface into all of that value for their users. Then their users will stay with them, and they'll go into their next chapter of growth. And the people who ignore it, I mean, it'll be akin to ignoring the internet, right? It'll be very similar to saying, hey, the internet isn't going to happen. We don't need to worry about the internet, right? Which obviously isn't, in retrospect, is obviously a ridiculous decision. But, there were very clear periods of time where those were very serious discussions by banks and others that, like, the internet, hey, not a big deal. We can ignore it. So I think it's a very clear analog to that.
Yeah. I mean, in the end, there has been, even before blockchain or DeFi, there were big initiatives in the market that were not driven by technology. They were driven by regulation or by efficiency. I mean, one of the good old ones, T2S in Europe, when T2S was actually launched in Europe, this huge settlement engine that actually settles securities across any European country, everybody was talking about disintermediation, and custodians will disappear and sub-custodians will become irrelevant, because then a German investor can go immediately into a French CSD, and why the hell would they use a sub-custodian? And nobody has disappeared, right? Everybody has adapted. Everybody has changed their models. Some people have lose some things that they used to make money out of it. A lot of these lucrative inefficiencies, and that's a good point too, is that if you're making money out of an inefficiency, that's something that will disappear. Whether it's because of technology, regulation, or customer expectations, you're not going to be able to make money out of failure or exceptions or stuff like that. Those things will probably disappear with technology. But for the rest, everybody will readapt, as you said. I mean, it's just a logical evolution of the banking system. But you and I have worked many times in this type, and we have had many discussions. I remember, I mean, you were just a few people in your company before the first time you collaborated with Swift, and throughout the years we have had many projects together. You have been part of the Inner Tribe sort of alumni, which is our innovation hub. You have presented in front of our board, which is 25 directors from the biggest banks in the world, and they have been impressive at what you guys have been doing with smart contracts and with Chainlink and everything else. But I was always wanted to ask you the question of what attracted you to work with Swift, right? Because it's not every fintech company wants to work with Swift or with the sort of incumbents. But so what do you think that we bring? Is it the member-owned model that we were talking about before? Is it something else? So what exactly did attracted you to work with us?
Yeah, so my thinking about Swift was always that it's something that powers a lot of the world's transactions and value. And that there has to be a number of reasons for that. It's not just a coincidence that something like this continues to exist and be critical to the global financial system since the 70s. So I don't know if a lot of people fully understand, the history of Swift or the value it's played or how it's been able to continue playing its role in the global financial system. Now my view obviously isn't as educated or informed as other people's. At Swift or at other places that know the fuller history. But as I understand it, I think there are fundamentally, three things. I think the first thing is that Swift created a lot of efficiency, basically taking the world from something called telex machines and something like faxes and this paper-based model. So Swift was really at the cutting edge of digitizing the movement of information about value, back in the 70s. So there really isn't an organization with more experience around digitizing value than Swift, in that it was doing that before the internet was even a realistic construct that people could rely on to send low value, unencrypted, plain text messages about their cat or their dog or their vacation or whatever. So Swift in that sense has a long history of experience. The second thing is that Swift is fundamentally a kind of standard, which I found fascinating when I actually understood it more. That Swift isn't necessarily just its own proprietary technology. It's actually a standard that people can use globally. So it's a global standard for how to message about transactions and define the role of different financial systems with each other. Now, once again, I'd never really believed that is what needs to be reinvented. So I don't think we need to reinvent how we message commands or the private key infrastructure, which I also knew Swift basically had the largest institutional public key, private key infrastructure for signing transactions, signing something to the order of, quadrillions of dollars in value, right? So these types of systems that sign quadrillions of dollars in value over the last 50 years, they have something that is right about them, right? There's something about their security model. There's something about their PKI. There's something about how they work that has some kind of value. And once again, I don't really understand why we would not use that part of the stack as essentially a signature layer and a messaging layer to issue commands into blockchains, right? So it's completely unclear to me why we would say, hey, let's get rid of this private key infrastructure. Let's not use it for whatever reason. People already have it. It already secures large amounts of value. It already secures very high value transactions on a regular basis. It already has a messaging standard to which you can add a new message type about blockchains. The only piece of the puzzle, in my opinion, that's missing is the ability to efficiently interface with multiple chains, because that is what's going to need to happen for all of the different kind of environments that the 12,000 member banks want to work in to be done efficiently, right? So if we want all of the member banks that have Swift PKI and Swift messaging standards directing how their systems operate today, suddenly interfacing with multiple chains, they already have the PKI, they already have a messaging standard, they can add some new message types to. I think what I always thought, even from the beginning, was how can we possibly make this infrastructure used for interfacing with blockchains? And I think what that will result in is actually a massive influx of value and liquidity into all of these different blockchains that do become integrated into bank systems. Because once again, I don't think the problem to solve here is the private key signing, HSM security of private keys problem. I think there's a sufficiently robust infrastructure that can be expanded with multi-sig schemes and other schemes that are more attractive to blockchains. And even a lot of the multi-sig providers out there, I know they use existing hardware and existing, SOC 2 and other standards for securing their systems, right? So even the multi-sig providers are using certain existing hardware, existing processes, right? That isn't what we need to reinvent. What we need to do is take all the world's value that is controlled by systems powered in those ways, with private key infrastructure and HSMs and all that infrastructure, and we need to accelerate the speed at which it can interface with DeFi, with decentralized insurance, with decentralized global trade, with all of these applications. And in my opinion, once that integration happens, and once banks, insurance companies, global trade companies, and everyone else can interface with the various on-chain contracts, that's when the amount of value accessible and placed in those contracts will go from billions to trillions pretty rapidly. That just really seems like a very logical path. And so from the beginning, my question was always, how can I work with the existing infrastructure to funnel its value into these blockchain smart contract systems in order to make them more useful for society quicker? Because that value is in those systems, and the speed at which we can get it into the blockchains and smart contracts is the speed at which those will become valuable and useful by whatever path we might take. And this is probably the quickest, most efficient path to just let people with existing systems use that. The final thing that I realized in the process of working with Swift, is firstly that everyone at Swift is actually a really nice person. You guys are in Belgium, right? You're really nice people. You're pretty relaxed. I actually always had a great time working with everybody at Swift to begin with. I'm a big fan of Belgium, big fan of a lot of the people at Swift that aren't in Belgium also, but it's just a very relaxed kind of nice group of people. It's not some kind of very very aggressive banking type of organization. So that's the first thing that I found very positive. And I always really enjoyed about working with you guys, and also how collaborative everybody is. And then the final thing that I realized, mainly a few months into working with you guys, was that you're member owned. And so what I think many people don't understand about why Swift has existed for 50 years, why it has moved quadrillions of dollars in value every year for decades, it's because it's actually, very similar to a DAO. It's very similar to a member. It is a member-owned cooperative. So if you actually looked at the governance structure of Swift, it's not some complete for-profit private entity that somehow creates a monopolistic advantage for any one bank or any one group. It's completely member-owned. The directors, the board of governors, whatever sets of different processes and layers of processes they're actually directed by the Swift member banks in proportion to their usage of Swift. So the degree to which a bank uses Swift actually resets their ability to direct Swift. And so there isn't even a set committee of member governors or member kind of people directing the organization, in that it purposefully adapts to usership, which really in my view is quite similar to the DAO and proof of stake and other models, where the degree to which you use a system is the degree to which you should be able to have sway over how it evolves. And the fascinating thing is that Swift has been operating this way for over 50 years and has been able to insulate itself from competition to a certain degree because of this, because all the member banks know that they aren't going to put some kind of monopolistic company in between them and their counterparty that then is going to eventually become a monopoly rent-seeking technology provider. Because as I understand it, Swift even returns fees back to its members if those fees surpass a certain threshold, so that the members are never having monopoly rent extracted from them. And so that's a fascinating model, because it's actually the model that a lot of DAOs and a lot of organizations in our industry aspire to arrive at. The organizations in the DeFi industry and in the blockchain industry want to arrive at a governance model where, decision making is decentralized across all interested parties. Decision making can change based on people's interest in the network, and Swift's ability to change its member voting based on transactional usage is exactly that. And it's been working for decades. So realistically, when I saw how the people at Swift operate, and when I understood the member-owned model of Swift, and that it wasn't just, the standard for-profit monopoly rent-seeking organization, it became clear to me that, this is the type of thing that realistically should and can continue to just own the PKI and the interfacing into all of these systems, because the members of it want to use it because they have the type of relationship with it that DeFi and other blockchain systems aspire to have with their user base. And I think this thing has never really been that clear to people in our industry. And when I understood it, it was kind of eye-opening for me. So between those two first things and the third one about being member-owned, those are the things that have led me to kind of actively pursue a working relationship with Swift to the degree that I can, because I just see all of these clear benefits, both to what the technology does and the infrastructure that already exists, and to how the organization operates and how it relates to its members.
Yeah, and people underestimate sometimes also the power of that standards piece that you were mentioning before, or they relate it too much to the messaging side, which usually sounds a little bit old. I think one of the first or second POCs that we did together with you back in 2017 was the fact that we show how the same messaging standard, which is ISO 20022, that it's used today to just write messages in XML, can actually afterwards be used to write a smart contract. Today, we probably have billions of APIs that are reading today or circulating our network that are also reading in ISO 20022. So you can take everything that you said, you can take the messaging component out of it, and it still work, right? You just need a medium of communication. It could be a smart contract, it could be an API, it could be a message, it could just be different nodes communicating with each other. And that standard, which is open source, it's often underestimated, and it will have huge benefits if people start using it more. But great explanation about Swift. It's even better than I think everybody within Swift could have done. So thanks for that.
Yeah, of course. I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think at the end of the day that people who make open source standards, people who create member-owned systems, people who have a PKI that has all this value already successfully secured, that's a useful, valuable system, right? There's every reason why the blockchain industry and the smart contract industry should be able to benefit by getting all of that value efficiently transitioned onto multiple chains, right? By basically connecting that PKI, that messaging system, that messaging standard to hundreds of different chains, and then overnight almost you will see banks, insurance companies being able to transact with a multitude of different chains, and the amounts of values that they'll be able to transact will be orders of magnitude higher than what we see from other applications. Not to say that they won't be useful. I actually think that interfacing, using that standard and using that PKI will accelerate the amount of value that can flow from institutions and enterprises into DeFi, into decentralized insurance, into the protocols that are being built in the public blockchain world today. So it's really a win-win for everybody. It's a win for the enterprises and the institutions in terms of their ability to interface with this technology, and it's a win for the blockchain applications because they suddenly have immediate access to a massive user base, as long as there's a way, maybe through something like Chainlink or some kind of system that enables the interface to all the different smart contracts and blockchains out there from this existing world. And so that's the body of work that we're working on and excited to be pursuing very, very actively. Once again, Jonathan, it's been a real pleasure to chat with you again and to get your feedback on all this. I really appreciate your thoughtful and insightful point of view on how the financial institutional world and the enterprise world will eventually be interfacing with the blockchain world in meaningful and important ways. And I think you're right. I don't think it'll be getting rid of everybody. I think it'll be a question of who is able to adapt and provide their user base with access to this new type of experience, these new types of systems. That's really what innovation and improvement is all about in the financial industry as well as in every other industry. So I'm thrilled that we had a chance to chat through all this. I think your point of view makes a lot of sense, and I'm very grateful that you took the time to speak with us about it here. Thank you very much.
Of course, thanks for the invite, and always a pleasure to talk to you, Sergey.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Sergey, for that fantastic discussion. Awesome to see that connection and discussion happening. We're going to take a brief break again with our nice beats on our rotating cube screen. So stick with us. We'll be right back in a few minutes with Stani from Aave. Welcome back, SmartCon #1 2021. Glad to have everybody here. We just heard Jonathan and Sergey from Chainlink and Jonathan from Swift having a conversation. Next, we're going to be speaking with Stanny from Aave. Stanny's going to give a brief keynote, and then we're going to move into a panel session. So stick around for these two interconnected events. Looking forward to both of them. But right now, Stanny Kulichov from Aave.
Hey everyone, welcome to my talk today. So today we're going to give a presentation about cross-chain Aave protocol, and the idea is to kind of like give briefly introduction on what Aave is as a protocol, as a community-owned protocol, and also how does the protocol work in terms of like cross-chain functionality, and what kind of interesting things this cross-chain ability brings, and how it actually empowers the whole ecosystem, and also kind of like how Chainlink plays in role what we are as a community constantly building. So those who probably you all know, many you might be newcomers into the Web3 space. So Aave is a decentralized liquidity protocol that is currently the biggest one in decentralized finance. And what it means is that as a liquidity protocol, you can deposit and supply funds into the protocol, and then draw liquidity against your funds that are being there as a collateral. And it's a way to create a yield market on chain that then other developers can actually build different kinds of protocols and products on top. And that's how the Aave liquidity itself comes to the protocol. So Aave is very developer-friendly protocol. And because of the reason that we have been, we've been building a developer-friendly protocol, it has grown quite substantially over this year and last year. And currently, it's the biggest DeFi protocol out there, and quite substantially important Web3 kind of like a piece of component in this space. And recently, we have included also not just the Ethereum market that we have, where the protocol has been deployed on Ethereum, but also in other markets, such as now as first is the Polygon, and we'll during this talk kind of like assess how do you evolve something that has been deployed in one particular blockchain and governed there, and how do you actually can expand your community across multiple networks, and how does the Aave community solve these challenges. So essentially, how the protocol works is that you supply assets into the protocol, and then as you supply and generate yield, that particular deposit becomes essentially also a form of a collateral, which allows you to draw other kind of assets from the protocol as well. And you can, of course, delegate that kind of like a drawing power to someone else, so someone else can actually draw on behalf of you, and create this kind of like a trust network as well with this credit delegation feature, which is something that we are currently experimenting, and hoping that more developers get interested in that feature, and building more trust-based DeFi applications on top of this feature. And also there's a component of liquidators also as market participants in the protocol, who are the liquidator network is decentralized, the same as the supplier participants and the borrowers as well, which means that liquidators are running autonomously and competing to liquidate unhealthy collateral positions within the protocol, and that way keeping the protocol healthy. And this has been very resilient way to keep collateralization and position management across DeFi, especially when assets are volatile. We've seen the Black Thursday a year ago, and now during last May, when the asset prices decreased substantially, which caused a lot of liquidations, and the Aave protocol has been very resilient towards that. So it's interesting to see, mainly because there's so much liquidity and because of automated market makers and flash loans that kept the DeFi protocols solvent during fluctuations. So this is the base concept, and of course, most important part, especially to me, is that Aave protocol is owned by the community and its users. So what this means is that the team has originally deployed the protocol and built it, but now anyone, any part of the world can actually contribute and do contribute on continuing building the protocol and improving it. And at the same time, when you have some kind of like changes, whether it's new builds or new features, all of this, or risk parameter changes, all of this has to go through a decentralized governance, meaning that the original team or any other development team can't arbitrarily change the protocol, and it has to go to the governance process where the token holders come together and vote on matters that are important to them, either for or against. And of course, what's fascinating is that this decision-making power can be also delegated, either the proposition power to put proposals on chain, or voting power to other participants. And we've seen for the past year that a lot of universities have become very active in DeFi governance, and it's fascinating to see this kind of movement where stakeholders are delegating their proposition power to protocol politicians, universities, and other entities. And this is kind of a very, very good direction. And of course, the Aave protocol has so-called safety module where you can deposit the Aave tokens, and then against incentives, you are pretty much backstopping the potential risk of the protocol, such as if there's some sort of a failed liquidation or some sort of smart contract vulnerability. The protocol itself has been audited by 5 different auditors and formally verified. So it's been working for quite a long time. But in case there is something, there's this safety module as a backstop mechanism. So this is how essentially the whole protocol governance and the backstopping works. And the Aave version 2, which was deployed last year, December, the market itself has been growing very much as the whole DeFi ecosystem. So we see where we are at the gross value locked in the protocol. This means how much of the value of those deposits are and supplying is in the smart contracts, and what is the amount of borrowing from the protocol against those collateral assets is happening. And especially for the past year, DeFi has grown substantially, and Aave, of course, has been growing as DeFi is growing, but also because of the fact that the protocol has wide range of different assets that are listed. But compared to other protocols, the asset parameters are very conservative. So there's specifically the governance votes on how much you can actually draw liquidity against which kind of an asset, depending on their risk profiles. So that's the kind of like a key metrics on the main market. And we deployed with the community in a market in Polygon, and Polygon essentially is proof of stake sidechain, which has EVM, which is Ethereum virtual machine, kind of mimics the same functionality what Ethereum itself has. Meaning that you can run the same smart contracts there, pretty much with the same configurations, but just different network settings. And that has the easiness of deploying to Polygon has been kind of like also driver, not just for Aave, but the whole DeFi community to experiment there and try try kind of like a grow their user base in Polygon network. And Polygon is interesting because of the proof of stake. The transaction costs are fractional compared to what we have on Ethereum main network. And I think the takeaway about that being a cross-chain protocol is that by tapping out different kinds of communities, especially in Polygon where the transaction fees are low, you reach out to a wider audience. And we have in the protocol currently 72,000 or so active users, and in the Polygon market over 140,000. So this is just showcases like the amount of users when the transaction fees are lower. And interestingly, more liquidity is in the layer 1. So it's kind of like a way to create more inclusiveness as well when you deploy to another network where you have less transaction fees. And this is kind of like a been very good approach for Aave to be cross-chain, and has also urged other protocols to do the same. And we can compare, for example, the numbers I showed previously on the layer 1 and layer 2. But the key component is that deposit amounts are actually smaller compared to what we have in layer 1, but way more users. And this is also interesting because in the future, when you govern the market, you somehow need to include those smaller kind of like a transactioning sizes and users that are participating in governance also be able to vote on the Polygon market with low gas fees. And we have been researching quite a lot on the fact like where as a cross-chain protocol, where the community would like to move next to. And pretty much the sentiments, what we have been reading is that there's sort of interested in a few of different kinds of chains. For example, there is Avalanche that actually has very fascinating consensus mechanism, but it's EVM compatible. There is proof of stake like Polygon. And other examples is Optimism, which is L2, which means that you're using the kind of like Ethereum security, but you're transactioning on a separate layer and then rolling up the transactions back to the main network and using that security where you lower transaction fees. Whereas if you go back and look at the Avalanche, for example, it's a completely separate chain with its own kind of fundamentals. And then we have example Arbitrum, which works similarly as optimistic rollups, but it has EVM, which means that it's easier to deploy there from technical perspective. And there's of course other solutions, sidechains such as Solana Neon and the ability to have EVM there as well. And I guess like most importantly, what it boils down in terms of like being cross-chain protocol is that security is very important. And when you have to build things from scratch, that means that you kind of like need to rethink on the security aspect of the protocol itself and how that will affect the deployments. Because building something like Aave protocol is very cost heavy, not because of the reason that it takes time to develop the actual code base, but because you have to put a lot of effort in the due diligence. And EVM compatible chains that's the reason they're easier to deploy for the Aave protocol. And of course, cross-chain governance. So that's important. So if there is a Polygon market, how the governance can be, how those markets can be governed with a way where you participate as a token holder and governance member. And this is something we've been researching and finding solutions on how we will be able to actually create mechanism of governance where you can vote on the layer 1 on decisions on Polygon market, or let's say Arbitrum or Avalanche, and then we propagate those results into those particular markets via governance bridging. This is something we're going to release in soon and discuss a bit more once we understand more about the rest of the structure that what we're doing in the cross-chain governance. yeah, of course, other things are the gas costs. I mean, voting is still too expensive, and this is something where we're looking into optimistic voting, where voting is off chain, but then someone takes the vote and puts that actual result on chain. Essentially, that's something we're looking kind of like to make the governance more inclusive. Thank you everyone for listening, and I want to thank Nicolo from the Aave team as well on helping these slides. And I hope you all have a very good time during this conference, and there's sort of interesting talks going on. Thank you so much.
Well, Stanley, don't go anywhere. I'm going to have you back on. Thank you very much for the presentation. Some great information in there. Excited to see Aave on everything. I am, at least. Now, we've got Stanley back to have a conversation with Sheila Warren from the World Economic Forum, moderated by Zach Seward. Come on up.
Love the space vibes of those tunes. Very nice. Welcome, welcome. We're going to chat about things. Soliciting some questions from the chat, so I'm going to get straight to it. Stanley, thank you very much. That was a really informative keynote. Cross-chain future for Aave, certainly very hype. Sheila, we're going to talk to you as well. Let me get some answers, Stanley. I'm going to ask some questions from the chat. Just kind of take it in order, sort of. All right. So first of all, you mentioned sort of this cross-chain future. I guess, let's go from the general to the complex. I'm going to start from some of the general questions that we got from the chat from viewers who are watching the keynote. First one, I think, is actually a good, simple question. How is Aave different from Compound in your view, Stanley?
Yeah, I guess it's not just a question related to how Aave is different from something very close to what we have, but also like the other DeFi protocols that might kind of like serve a different kinds of functioning, because there's always differences in terms of features. I mean, feature-wise, Aave has collateral swaps there in the protocol, flash loans integrated as well, and we have a kind of like a different way of calculating yields, and also there's the stable borrowing rate as well instead of like only variable rate. But like I guess like for all of the DeFi protocols, essentially what they are communities that are assessing and selling risk to their kind of like risk and reward to their users. For example, the Aave community has a different kind of I would say the risk assessment framework, and also like way to manage risk compared to, for example, the Compound or MakerDAO's model or any other protocol that is in DeFi. And that means essentially that the community comes together and votes on risk parameters on, let's say, what kind of asset could be listed, what kind of risk there could be, and that's essentially what differentiates every protocol from each other. And in terms of like Aave protocol, it has quite conservative risk parameters, so you can't draw liquidity against your collateral that high. You don't get that much of collateral out of the protocol. But at the same time, the community lists quite wide repertoire of new assets into the protocol. So that's the kind of like a difference, in my opinion, across DeFi.
Okay, cool. So I'm hearing a little bit about the onboarding process for new tokens. So I'm going to skip that question. Good question, Matthew B. Thank you very much. One question I did want to ask, you talked about sort of this multi-chain future and this idea of Aave everywhere, which is really interesting. What's your view of the Polkadot ecosystem at this point in time?
It's very interesting. Since I kind of like saw Polkadot the first time and started reading and getting myself introduced on what they're building, there's so many components there. Like pretty much, of course, like what fascinates me is the ability to kind of like use like the main network and secure parachains, and you can spin up a parachain and kind of like have decentralization there to any kind of like extent is very fascinating, and what we are at Aave also kind of like researching, but also the ability to use different languages and then which is compiled into assembly and WebAssembly from technical perspective. That's very fascinating to us. I think the ecosystem isn't fully ripe yet, but I think once it's very ripe, I think it will be very interesting to the whole Aave community to deploy there something or maybe there could be even like another party in the Aave community that could just focus on actually Polkadot, because it's a ecosystem that definitely will be thriving in the future. That's very interesting.
Definitely, yeah, definitely early days there for sure. All right, couple more questions, and then we'll get to the Zach and Sheila questions. All right, I got to ask this one from Chainlink God, Twitter legend Chainlink God. He wants to know, how important is Chainlink price feeds and Chainlink keepers to the future of Aave?
Yeah, I mean, increasingly important. So every second that the more value that our protocol captures, not just on Ethereum layer 1, but for example in Polygon and elsewhere where Chainlink price feeds are used, and they're used pretty much everywhere where Aave is. That would be kind of like I would say even like a gate into data for the protocol itself and the whole DeFi ecosystem. And it also showcases like how not just like valuable the Chainlink is for Aave and rest of the DeFi, but how important and responsible role it's playing, and kind of like how important it is that as a DeFi community and Chainlink community is looking towards like not just kind of like a brainstorming the future of these price feeds, but also how all this risk management and everything is improved in the future because of the importance of Chainlink. So it pretty much touches all the assets that we have in the protocols. It's critical infrastructure, and that is something where we need to put more and more focus over time.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thank you for answering those questions from the chat. I want to zoom out a little bit because I think there's a lot of really interesting material that we can cover here. You mentioned, DeFi by some metrics is a $70 billion subsector of the crypto economy. Aave, obviously the leading platform at present. I want to talk about DeFi's next chapter. And I think we're hearing a lot about institutional DeFi in the market these days. You have an institutional product that you've been working on. I think it's called Aave Arc now. Are there any updates as to when that is going to ship?
Yeah, Aave Arc is fascinating product. So as currently the Aave market, of course, it's deployed. The protocol is deployed in Ethereum, Polygon, and we're looking into other networks. But also within Ethereum, we're experimenting with the Aave Arc part of the protocol, which is essentially a separate private market on top of Ethereum, which means that there's a whitelister in the market that can be in the multiple whitelister in the future, which the Aave governance chooses. And this whitelister can then whitelist and blacklist suppliers, borrowers, and liquidators within the protocol, meaning that you can create completely new market with additional requirements. And with the Arc market, actually, you can deploy them multiple, depending on what kind of requirements you want to have. But also, the first one is based on kind of like a compliance requirements that the whitelister wants to uphold for the users. Meaning that essentially you can create a market that just has higher compliance requirements, meaning it's more institutional friendly. Meaning that the institutions that otherwise have difficulties in participating in the kind of like permissionless DeFi, they can try the Aave Arc market and kind of like get used to the smart contract execution, have the same transparency that Ethereum as a public blockchain ledger provides, meaning that every transaction is auditable, seen every single second, every single block. And also you have, instead of paper transactioning, you have smart contract execution, so you can trust that the smart contracts executes as they're built. And also risk parameters set by the Aave governance. So essentially, it provides pretty much like a soft launch for institutions to use DeFi where they have higher risk appetite. But also it allows to spin up a new Aave Arc market for some other particular reason. Might not be compliance, but maybe you want to create a private market with some particular assets that are not listed in the main market and are special for some particular reason. So it's a very fascinating product.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk more about sort of these parallel tracks of DeFi in a second. I'm certainly guilty of this. I often talk about institutions as this monolithic sort of faceless mass. When we talk about institutions in the context of Aave Arc, who are we talking about? Who's going to be the first institution that really gets its hands dirty on these DeFi protocols? Who are you? When you say institutions, vaguely, like who are you referring to?
Yeah, the concept of the institution is very, very wide, right? So as you know, Zach, and I think like for us in the first Aave market, Aave Arc market, there's going to be Fireblocks, Galaxy Digital, and a few other Fireblock clients. So it's going to be starting very small in the beginning, just to kind of like build up the liquidity. But also we're talking at the same time to the biggest banks globally, and smaller private banks as well. So there's a lot of interest out there. Of course, the thing is that we can't fit all of these interested entities into the same Aave Arc market, because everyone has their different kinds of like compliance requirements or other requirements in terms of like counterparties might not be compliance reasons at all. And that is why the future kind of will be that there will be this kind of like Aave Arc markets, this kind of like a pods, and you will have a few counterparties between different, depending on the requirements. And probably the first Aave Arc market will be the most scaled one, essentially. And especially as we add more as a community, the whitelisters there. And I think that's the kind of like institutional scale, but mainly it will be targeted to kind of like a bigger funds and hedge funds, and over time maybe the banks and the Coinbases of the world. But it will start slowly.
Okay, that really primes the pump for Sheila. So thank you for doing that. Sheila, I think this is a really fascinating question. This idea of sort of regulated DeFi or more regulated DeFi or whitelisted DeFi or KYC DeFi. From the folks that you talk to sort of in the orbit of the World Economic Forum, is that something that's appealing? Are people nervous about that? What is sort of the conversation? What's the pulse check when it comes to institutional DeFi here at this point in time?
Yeah, well, thanks, Zach. As with anything, it depends on who you ask. There are a variety and a multitude of opinions. I think there is definitely a feeling that there's something about DeFi that is going to necessitate regulation. I think the views on the timing of regulation are highly divergent. I think some people think that, we should just take everything we already know, take KYC, port these things directly over into DeFi. It's not a view that I agree with at all. I think that regulation at this point is pretty premature because we're still at a really pretty early stage of the innovation arc. And so any regulation really risks cutting off innovation that I actually think could accomplish some of the goals these regulators are trying to achieve, namely consumer protection, fraud prevention, financial inclusion, et cetera. If you regulate something before you really understand it, before it's had a chance to shape itself, then what you're really doing is pushing it into a particular model that may or may not achieve the ends that policymakers are trying to achieve in the first place. So that's my personal view, but certainly views on this differ. And there are, as we see, there are regulators who are very eager to get in there and start shaping the space and kind of make it into a mold that I do think more resembles traditional financial institutions than I think most of us would like to see or think is appropriate.
Yeah. So how do you shape that conversation? Because I think when we talk about regulating DeFi, it really is sort of like square peg, round hole. A lot of these frameworks don't work in DeFi. And we're seeing that in conversations with the FATF and all sorts of regulatory conversations happening both in the US and abroad. So this is still with you, Sheila. How should we advance that conversation with regulators that, hey, we might need to rethink when it comes to some of these decentralized lending platforms?
Yeah, well, my personal view, and the kind of approach that we're taking with the team here at the forum is to do a lot of education, to really try to encourage, to say that it's not enough to kind of understand the applications, the services being provided here, because again, our minds can only often tend to sort of put things into boxes we understand. So you think about credit, and you have an understanding of how credit markets work, and then you assume that any kind of new credit opportunity is going to mimic essentially those offerings without necessarily being able to imagine or fathom what other things might look like. And so we try to encourage that technical understanding is really important, and understanding not just theoretically what decentralized finance and the protocols can do, but actually what's actually happening, and what the growth curve is really looking like. Not not the growth curve in terms of dollar value or market cap or any of that, but the technology growth, like what's really scaling here and what the opportunities could be. And I think that as with the early days of the internet, and I think we're in a similar time, there was a real concern at that, however many years ago, 20 years ago, that there was going to be this, again, I call it premature regulation that was going to cut off innovation. So we try to really spotlight that this is a space that is operating. It's not the Wild West that people are making it out to be. In some cases, the media or others who might have an agenda. It really is a space that is growing and emerging and has principles underlying it. And those principles really are to provide a more democratized access and more inclusion into financial services, essentially. So we try to do a lot of that. I think we also try to, generally speaking, leaving aside even crypto or blockchain, just talk about regulation as a general frame and say, is it the case that our regulatory models are going to translate into what we call the fourth industrial revolution? Like as these new convergent technologies, I'm talking AI, increasing use of smart devices, mobility considerations, like all these things come into play and start intersecting. Should we expect that our regulatory systems and the models that were built under a very different understanding of the way the world operates, a very different understanding of the digital economy, in many cases before the digital economy, should we expect them to just kind of flop over into this new world? I don't think that we should. So what are some new ways we can encourage collaboration between industry, the private sector, public sector? We can get the more of these conversations happening. We facilitate a number of these behind the scenes, connecting people. And what are ways that we can open up our models of regulation to ensure that the principles as a society we care about, some of the ones I mentioned, right, protecting vulnerable populations, more enhanced inclusion, equity, how can we make sure we're baking these into new regulatory models that are forward thinking in terms of the direction of travel with these various technologies?
So be my boots on the ground, and I'm going to ask for a 1 to 10, a scale of 1 to 10 on the level of sophistication and nuance when it comes to the questions that you're being asked about DeFi right now. Where are we? Are these questions savvy? Are we at the one end of the spectrum where it's like real basic, really silly? Are we at the 10 end of the spectrum where people understand the promise and potential of these technologies? Just give me that rating. Where would you say we are?
I mean, when you asked me that, Zach, I literally pictured a 1 to 10 number line, and I can plot a person on 1 to 10.
Well, you're free to name names. You're absolutely free to name names.
It widely varies, right? I think the more that policymakers understand the need to have some technical understanding, the closer they are to the 10. And those who are really just kind of looking at the media and looking at, what's kind of being reported or maybe on Twitter or whatnot, it's really more towards the 1. But I will say, and I think it's important to note that a lot of policymakers are really trying. They really are trying to understand. They are trying to get up to space very quickly get up to speed very quickly in a space that is extraordinarily complicated. And I wouldn't even say that a lot of pundits that are crypto pundits deeply understand DeFi, right? Like they might have some other thing they understand really well, but this is a challenging space. There's a lot going on. So I do want to give credit where credit is due to those that are really making an effort to try to get out there, have a lot of conversations, read a lot of more sophisticated kind of offerings, and get to an understanding.
Fantastic. All right, Steny, I'm jumping back to you. I think this idea of democratizing financial access often means going through sort of mainstream gatekeepers. And Uniswap let slip the other week that they had been talking to PayPal and Robinhood and E-Trade as these traditional fintechs look to incorporate DeFi in some capacity to their suite of services. Who are you talking to on that front? You don't have to name names, but if you do, that's great. When it comes to the conversations with the world of traditional fintech, who is Aave talking to about some of the things that DeFi can offer their user bases?
Yeah, I think we have, Aave has a lot of exposure because of the fact that how big it is today as a protocol. Aave is the biggest protocol now, and it's cross-chain, meaning that it also kind of like taps into audience that isn't necessarily in the main Ethereum network. And we actually have, as a protocol, more users in Polygon, which is a proof of stake network, twice as many. So it definitely reaches out in a wider kind of like a demographic. But also, I would say in terms of we don't have especially any kind of an outreach to financial institutions or traditional market participants. There's a lot of inquiries and more of like a education that we do, and we have discussions with probably the biggest banks and investment banks, and also like consumer banks as well. We do a lot of discussions with fintechs, custodians, pretty much like almost every big household, fintech we have been talking to, and the major banks one way or another. So even like as a small team, and kind of like what we want more is not just like, these entities being able to reach Aave and learn more about the Aave protocol, but also like having more on, like, I would say like entities where these entities could reach upon and just like learn more from the community. So basically, like what we will want to see is more like a community run entities that are trying to educate more traditional financial institutions. And I think that's the kind of like a missing part, because there isn't that much of a value if financial institutions are reaching out to Aave and thinking like how they can learn more, but more of like understanding the whole space in general, and also understanding the community aspect and the sentiment there. But especially with the Aave ARC market, there has been more and more interest there. And I think for me, what's important is that two things is well understood. One is the properties of decentralized finance, because decentralized finance for me is important because it brings inclusivity, in the sense that if you use these protocols, you can use them globally with similar kind of like an access and to the markets, but also that you can access them and you see the transparency. Each and every transaction, everything is auditable every second, compared to banking systems that are kind of like a black box in terms of markets. And being able to also build new things and iterate quickly and build innovation is very interesting. For example, from the perspective of RegTech, smart contracts are very powerful, because not only you see everything, all the transaction, you can build better risk management tools, but also you can trust that the smart contracts execute the way they're programmed. Because in paper agreements, you can agree upon many things, but the execution might lack for one or another reason. So that's the one thing. And the second thing is the community ownership. So many of the institutions, they actually understand that the protocols are owned by their communities, meaning that they are making decisions. And there isn't like a central party or anyone kind of like there making the decisions. And secondly, that they understand that by providing liquidity, you get also as a user that community power and participation. So those are the things that have been well communicated, and I think are powerful.
So I'll ask this of both of you. I'll start with Stanny, because I'm interested in your perspective on this one. If I were to, posit the thesis that these protocols will sync to the background behind various abstraction layers that people will use Aave without knowing they're using Aave, is that thesis smart or dumb? Do you think that's going to happen? Or do you think that Aave, Compound, Uniswap, these will be the big brands of the future of finance?
I think the protocols will always run in the background, and they will be governed by the community, and probably over time, as the protocols will be evolving, maybe they will be even renamed depending on what kind of functionalities. But the as a brands, I would say Aave as a team is just a Web3 development entity which aims to just build part of the Web3 until there's more and more people building. And what it means for us is that as we're building decentralized finance, our next thing, and this kind of like a financial graph, our next thing to build now, where we have allocated a lot of resources, is to build a social graph, and kind of like a social media type of a protocol where kind of like we're moving towards one thing, building to another, and completely different, because we see blockchain as a store of value, meaning that you cannot just store like, let's say, monetary value or any kind of value, but you can also store relationships linking to art, or what we have, for example, with NFTs. I think like the brand will stick on Aave being able to build secure protocols, which is important, and have this kind of like a composability. But also like essentially those protocols will run by themselves the same way as Ethereum is running by itself and governed by the validators. In Aave's case, it's the users and the community.
Sheila, what's your view of whether DeFi will sort of sink to the background and the question is, this is still used by a fairly small subset of the world population. There are potential benefits to a wide subset of the global population. What's your view in terms of how DeFi will be used should it approach mainstream level adoption?
Yeah, well, I think you asked a number of different questions there, Zach, so I'll kind of tease them apart a little bit. And so one is, the extent to which DeFi is going to become a phenomenon that is commonplace. I think, yes, I do think that is very dependent, of course, on the way it is regulated and on the enabling environment, that surrounds it. And so with that caveat, I think that yes, and my hope is that yes, we'll move in that direction. In terms of whether the protocols will become brand names, I think or sink into the background or whatnot. I think it's both. And I also think it's too soon to tell. It's going to depend a lot on decisions that, Stani and Leshner and Hayden and others make. Right now, if you think about the current moment is really honing in on building and perfecting the infrastructure with applications on top of it as well, then you can kind of imagine that there's going to be a suite of services that really start to thrive and take off, which is already slowly starting to happen. But you're going to see more emphasis on that kind of thing. Teams that are more product kind of oriented, doing that kind of thing. Who's going to do that? I mean, you're talking to somebody on our panel, right, who's got the foresight to probably understand that's going to happen with Aave, and others are going to know and make decisions there as well. It's going to depend on the extent to which these protocols, the companies that are working with the protocols, of course, which are distinctions that are important to make, are focusing on protocol maintenance or whether they're focusing on building this giant suite of services. And I am certainly not the person that could predict that. So that's why I kind of say it's both and a bit too soon to tell.
Gotcha. So Stani, as someone in the belly of the beast, what's the next big DeFi milestone that you are looking for that signals to you that DeFi has taken that next step?
I think the Aave Arc market kind of like working as designed and creating maybe kind of like inspiring institutions to kind of like look at decentralized finance as a software could actually be very good software to replace or be part of the software stack that we have now in other places in finance. I don't think the protocols are anything like businesses or anything like that. They're pretty much software, what I see. And if we are able to use this more efficient software, which is governed by their users and not companies that are building, that will be like a more fair, democratic way actually of governing something which is very important, which is financial infrastructure. So that's like one thing which is I'm looking forward to.
Got it. And so Sheila, what's the milestone that that you're looking toward, to signal that that next step in the evolution of DeFi?
Yeah, I was trying to remember, Zach, the last time you asked me that question, what I said, and I don't remember, but I imagine it was the same answer.
I should have dug it up. I should have dug it up and just put you on the spot.
I don't remember, but I'll tell you what I'm going to say now, which is I think some kind of clarity around the direction of regulation. This remains one of the biggest challenges, I think, to growth in the space and to the amount of energy people are going to put into it. And so once I think this has died down a bit and there's a little less, let's call it less regulatory turbulence, I think then we're going to really see that everything take off. And we're going to be more confident, I think, as a community that we can really deep dive and start pushing a lot of the things we all want to do forward.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to wrap it there. Thanks so much, Sandy, for the keynote and the additional thoughts. Thank you so much, Sheila, for conversing with us here. This has been great. Thanks to the folks in the chat for participating and suggesting some really great questions as well. I'm Zach Seward from CoinDesk. I'm going to toss it back to Andy. Hope everyone's having a great day, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you to our presenters. Hey, thanks, Zach, for coming on. Really appreciate your insightful questions. Pulling from the audience, we appreciate that. I want to take a moment and talk to our audience as well. There have been a few questions that I want to tell you guys about. Some people have asked, will the videos be available later on? Yes, we are working to make sure those are posted and available at a later date. So if you miss a segment, or if you need to go back and take a couple of notes on something Balaji said or Sergey said, that will be available to you. In addition to that, we're working hard to release content that kind of corresponds with many of these sessions. So you should be able to follow along with Chainlink on Twitter and see a lot of those announcements, or if you follow any of these other organizations as well. So please feel free to do that. While I have you guys here for just a minute, the hop-in interface is also really cool. If you guys kind of check out, this conference is more than just a couple of stages. First of all, we do have 2 stages. This is the innovation stage. We're talking to many great founders and amazing projects, but there's also the Chainlinked stage, which is another stage featuring a lot of developer content, some research content. So we really have a 2-stage conference in this SmartCon. So check out the schedule and make sure to check those out. There's some really great content over there. I'm not seeing any of it, so I'm going to count on those videos being up later on to make sure that I can catch up. On the hop-in page, as you're watching, there's some things on the left bar as well. There's stages and sessions. That's like a schedule you can go and check out. There's a networking event as well. It'll randomly pair you with somebody else around the world watching SmartCon, and so you can start doing some of that networking. I haven't been able to do it this year because I've been doing this, but last year I met a couple of people, and so that is a cool thing. And I know some of our Chainlink advocates from around the world are doing that as well. So please check that out. And then the bottom tab is the Expo. A number of supporting projects that are supporting the conference are there, including Chainlink Labs BD team. So if you're a developer thinking about integrating Chainlink, go and talk to those folks there. They're there to meet with you and start those conversations. And also the Chainlink Labs careers team. If you're thinking about a career in Web3, in blockchain and smart contracts, come talk to our careers folks. They will help you out, direct you to the right places, and start you down that path. That's what I did, is I started talking to them, and hey, that's how it happens sometimes. Okay, we're going to keep rolling shortly. We're going to take another short break and listen to some of those sick beats, as you guys like very much. And we're going to have to find that track and put it out on Twitter. I'll work on that because people like it. So for another few minutes, pop on those headphones, get into the groove, and we'll be back in a minute with Clark Parsons. Welcome back to SmartCon. It's me, Andy Boyan. I am your MC. And I mean, you may have noticed over the course of the day, we've taken a slight little turn. We're starting to talk a little bit more about government tech, and CBDCs are coming up. So I'm really excited to hear this presentation about the digital euro and a path forward. So up next, we have our speaker, Clark Parsons from the Internet Economy Foundation, to give a presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks everybody on the Chainlink team. We're really excited to be able to present to you guys today. I'm going to talk just for 10 minutes, a quick keynote about a study that we're about to publish in a few weeks that we've been doing in partnership with Chainlink about the digital euro. But first, to give you some idea of who the heck is talking and a little bit of context, I introduced the Internet Economy Foundation, which is the foundation that I've been running for 5 years. And it is interesting, Andy, as you mentioned, we're sort of moving a little towards regulation. The panel just a moment ago, Sheila Warren, really appreciated her comments about this notion of innovation versus regulation, and where are we on that scale with the development of DeFi. This is something that the Internet Economy Foundation has actually been grappling with from the beginning too. So a little bit about the IEF and what we're about. We're an independent think tank. We're based in Berlin. It's important to know that we're actually not funded by any government. We're not a trade federation. We're funded by founders and funders, actually from the internet scene. And also important to know in the world of think tanks, we don't have any money from our beloved Silicon Valley companies, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, or any of our Chinese friends. It's really important for us to maintain that independence, but we do see ourselves as a link between the web industry and the policymakers. It's, as Sheila said, some are at 1 and some are at 10 in their understanding of where the web is. And it's really important, I think, to have organizations like ours trying to help the politicians that do want to understand. We're working from a European point of view, and if you could boil us down to one word, it would be competition. We really are trying to keep Web 2.0, 3.0, DeFi, whatever stage of web or tech you're working on, we want to keep it free and fair and competitive. So if you look at the Web 2.0 race, which I guess has been running for the last 15 years, this is the way most Europeans would see how that's been going. That's sorry for all the white males in the picture. It's not a very diverse drawing, but the point there is that Europe has been huffing and puffing. The solution is, of course, not to just over-regulate and hope that somehow that'll make champions. The Internet Economy Foundation really was born to try and help Europe compete on a fair playing field. A bit of some of our activities over the past 5 years. We do a lot of studies. We do a lot of background discussions, trying to translate the world of the internet to policymakers, and then actually help them decide where should they regulate, what should they regulate, and if so, how. And just to give you see some of the stuff we've done, disinformation was a big topic a couple of years ago. It's now feeding into the Digital Services Act at the EU level. We focus on 3 main areas. One is infrastructure, which for us started as things like 5G and broadband and cloud computing, but now, of course, crypto and blockchain for us are key, huge pieces of the coming digital infrastructure. And one study I would highlight here, one of our earliest ones, we looked at the platform economy. It was it's a subject that's really been a lot of the speakers today have touched on some of the principles that we were talking about when we looked at the platform economy. This chart is actually 5 years old, but it could be from yesterday because the market share portions of most of the dominant players are still the same. And that's kind of one of the missions of the Internet Economy Foundation is where there is market dominance, we want to try and break it up or find a way to bring competition in there. And this is something, again, that discussion that was just in the previous panel about should we regulate, should we not, should we let innovation flourish? 20 years ago, the US government said, let's let innovation flourish. 20 years later, we have some market dominance in some spots. We actually created a chart for how to spot a gatekeeper, if you will, or how or when to regulate a gatekeeper. This was something that we think is right now being discussed in Brussels with the Digital Markets Act. And as you could see, just to give you some examples, I mean, Uber or Lyft those are platforms, they're aggregators, they're multi-sided markets, but in competition terms, they're not hurting anybody in terms of being a gatekeeper or a marketplace that could dominate the others. So we tried to keep this sort of scale where you could judge, okay, is somebody mission critical? Is someone market dominant? Are they a gatekeeper? Are they a bottleneck? And ultimately for us, it boiled down to things like search engines, operating systems, app stores, pretty common examples that most people would agree on where market dominance has led to abuse. I mean, you look at the way the advertising technology market is running right now, and I think we're all in agreement on that. So that's just some thoughts about the IEF. Why do we care about crypto and blockchain? Well, for a couple of reasons. First of all, deep tech, as it is defined, is really something where Europe is placing a lot of its poker chips. And you could argue this is a slide from a few years ago, the Slush State of European Tech survey, where they looked at different countries and what emerging deep tech elements were best poised for certain countries. And as you can see, crypto blockchain, I would actually disagree. I think, ironically, the German ecosystem, if you see, Ocean, Fractal, the Polkadot ecosystem, Kilt, there's a lot of really great stuff going on in that marketplace. So we've got a study coming out, and so this is a bit of a preview of it. And in fact, there's a panel right after this on CBDCs who will do much better deep dive on the issue. But to set the table for that, we've teamed up with Lakestar, Chainlink, and Economy, and we want to really try and again have a study for someone like this gentleman here, who's from the European Central Bank, saying, hey, don't worry, we'll protect you all from that crazy DeFi world. We'll bring a digital euro out that'll sort of be safe and protect your privacy, but we promise it won't be too crazy innovative. We'll see where that goes. We want to accompany this process. We think there's a huge opportunity for all CBDCs, especially the European one. It has a lot of potentials. Interestingly enough, you could even correct some of the birth mistakes, if you will, of the way the euro was designed. But bottom right for us is, of course, the most important one, and the most important for the Chainlink ecosystem and all of the DeFi world is, if you can architect your digital currency properly, you can enable much more digital innovation to flourish. And for us, that's the key. That's what this is all about, is if you get it right, you can unite the best of all of these worlds, because as we heard from the great talk between Sergey and Jonathan earlier from Swift, this old infrastructure isn't going anywhere. I love Jonathan's phrase about the lucrative inefficiencies. Yes, of course they'll go away, but a digital euro has the opportunity to enable a lot of great new innovation to sit on top of the existing ecosystems. So this pyramid, if you will, is for us what the key to our study will be, and I think it'll be the key to a lot of central bank digital currency discussions and debates in the coming years. What are the design choices that are going to need to be made? What are the architecture choices that will have to be made, and what will that lead to? And actually, in this pyramid, you actually sort of work your way up from the bottom to say, okay, how do we want to do this? Do we want to make it account-based or token-based? Think of a credit card versus cash. One is a token, one is an account. And as you make these design choices, you can work your way up the pyramid and potentially enable whole new levels and ecosystems of innovation to sit atop it. So in our study, we're of course not making all of these choices right now for the ECB or others. We're trying to lay things out so that everyone can understand what's at stake, because those are really the key elements for how to make sure that an innovation economy can sit atop this system. So final slide, and the key one, if I was able to talk to Ms. Lagarde of the ECB, these are the recommendations that we, together with Chainlink and Lakestar and Economy, are putting out there for the ECB to have in mind while they're designing a digital euro and starting this process. Obviously, European financial sovereignty is a huge issue. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, in Europe, we're quite aware of our weakness. Visa and MasterCard are not European systems. Thankfully, Swift is like a DAO, wonderful, but a lot of the payment and transaction world and a lot of the existing banking systems and payment systems worldwide are not in European hands, and that makes a lot of people nervous. So we want a digital euro to reinforce the euro's position. We obviously want it to be designed with a more secure future, but for us, the number 4 and number 5 are the key elements here as part of our recommendations. You really need to have form, follow, function, and build something for the innovation ecosystem, and especially tailor it to meet the needs of the startup, scale-up, and DeFi ecosystems. Because as you can see from today, what's going on here with SmartCon, there's an incredible future here for IoT, for smart contracts, for machine-to-machine transactions. And I think if we can get a digital euro that helps us harness all that, then the sky's really the limit, and SmartCon 2 will have double again in terms of the numbers of people here. So thanks again. Thanks back over to you, Andy. Looking forward to the CBDC panel coming up. And thanks again to the great Chainlink team for this opportunity. Next slide, final one. Please contact us, stay in touch. We'll have not only this digital euro study coming out, but others on this subject. Please keep in touch and we'll make sure you get a copy. And thanks again to the Chainlink team.
Clark, thank you so much for joining us. If I can keep you for just 1 minute, I got a question for you. Have you noticed, 5 years ago, the talk of antitrust was, some fringe lobbyists and think tanks who are excited about it. But now it seems like it's entering into the public consciousness more, especially in the States, but then across Europe and around. Have you noticed that shift?
Oh, good Lord. Yeah, I like to think I was part of that shift. We were very lonely 5 years ago, when we put out a study and said monopoly or gatekeepers. So definitely that shift is there. But ironically, the shift didn't really happen until we saw a lot of the negative consequences of monopolies or market dominance. On the disinformation side, several elections happened and people started suddenly realizing, why do we have so much market power in the hands of a duopoly in global advertising? And so that shift is there. And I guess the message is, what sounds or seems like a fringe group or kind of crazy now can be the middle of the road in 5 years. I'm old enough to remember when there was competition in search 25 years ago. And when I see the DeFi space, when I see crypto blockchain, it sounded and seemed like a kind of a fringe thing a few years ago. It's now obviously right in the middle of things, as you can see. And I think that's what's exciting, is that if you develop this nose in technology that most of us have, this love for the new, things that seem a little crazy or wild can, within a matter of time, become absolutely a dominant force.
Thank you so much, Clark. I appreciate you taking a little bit of time, a curiosity of mine. And to the audience, I just want to tie some of the threads. If you take a listen back to some of the things Sheila Warren is talking about, to the Swift presentation as well, and to what Internet Foundation is also working on, there are themes coming. And so sometimes it takes a lot to get the flywheel of change moving, but we're absolutely seeing some of that. So Clark, thank you again for your time today and bringing us these fantastic ideas.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, guys.
Coming up next, we're going to take, again, just a tiny break, but then we're going to bring on a panel about CBDCs. So we're going to learn a little bit about that from an expert panel of academic researchers. We'll be right back. SmartCon 2021.
Hello, and welcome to the panel on central bank digital currencies and blockchain, organized by the Smart Contract Research Forum, or SCURF, as part of the Smart Contract Summit. I'm Eugene Leventhal, the operations lead here at SCURF, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel. You'll be able to learn more about the panelists through smartcontractresearch.org/T/623. We'll also add the specific link at the end in case you didn't catch that. With that, I'll pass it off to Andrew Miller to kick us off with introductions before we get into the moderated discussion.
Thanks, Eugene. Very happy to get started. So I'm Andrew Miller. I'm an assistant professor in computer engineering at the University of Illinois. There I lead the Decentralized Systems Lab, and my research mainly focuses on cryptography, programming languages, and blockchain designs, a lot of smart contract programming, and so the very technical side of cryptocurrencies. I've been in the blockchain space for about 9 years. I was in, I think, the first cohort of folks who did PhD dissertations focused on cryptocurrencies. All that is to say, I think I have a good grasp on the technical side of blockchains and maybe on the cryptocurrency ecosystem's view of narratives and how finance works. But I'm very new to basically learning anything about how mainstream finance or central banks or real world banks work. I think that I'm on this panel because I co-authored with some other folks at the Initiative for Cryptocurrencies and Contracts a paper on design choices for CBDCs. I mostly have some perspective on what kinds of programming interfaces CBDCs might have and what kinds of privacy issues and techniques that they would have. And interested in learning and some much weaker perspectives, I would say, on the kind of institutional and organizational and policy issues of CBDCs. I think you asked to give an explanation of what is a CBDC as a short one in this first pass. So to me, the developer's perspective or the blockchain perspective, I think has to be pretty loose. So I would call it a CBDC, whether it has just as really centrally operated and directly retail customers to a central bank, or something that's more hierarchical with member banks and commercial banks involved. In either way, to me, what makes it a CBDC is if it incorporates any kind of blockchain technology, whether it's cryptography to provide privacy, smart contract programming to provide extensibility. And what I kind of expect is likely to emerge as the real promising pattern is the idea of the central bank providing an API platform for programming with some kinds of rules or regulations or constraints built in at the platform level, but then a very high amount of flexibility for commercial banks and member banks to be able to customize their own applications through this programming interface, and then compete on the kind of functionality that they could offer. So it's really the CBDC as a platform kind of view. So I'll yield there.
Thank you, Andrew. Ariel, do you mind going next?
Sure. Thanks, Eugene. My name is Ariel Zetland-Jones. I'm an economist at the Tepper School of Business at Carnegie Mellon University. My research focuses on how information and technology shape financial markets and the implications of financial markets and financial market regulation for the broader macroeconomy. Lately, I've been studying the role of blockchain in disrupting financial markets and thinking about what economics can shed light on for kind of blockchain and the computer science aspects. So thinking about how to harness economic incentives to improve consensus on distributed ledgers, or how to use economic incentives to improve, in theory, to improve, say, the design of stablecoins. With a training in macroeconomics and monetary economics, I've thought a lot about the role of government and private payment systems in the macroeconomy. And so the perspective I'll try to add is kind of the interaction between what monetary policy and central bank digital currency may or may not achieve in changing our payment system. I guess I have a very similar perspective to Andrew in terms of what a central bank digital currency may be. I think the critical distinction is whether we think a central bank digital currency is going to be only accessible by financial institutions or accessible to retail customers. And I think the most interesting aspects, as Andrew suggested, is that what's new about CBDC is offering access to, say, a savings account at the central bank for retail customers. And whether that's an account-based system or a token-based system are interesting questions. But I think that's the newest aspect of a central bank digital currency. And then the question is, how will this impact our payment system? How will this impact the traditional banking system in good ways or bad? And what does it imply for monetary policy? And so those are, I think, all interesting questions to start thinking about.
Great. Thank you, Ariel. And Philip, do you mind jumping in next?
Thanks. Yes, my name is Philipp Sandner. I'm working at the Frankfurt School of Finance and Management, which is a small university in Germany. Not everybody might know this university. As I said, it's a small one. We have 400 business faculties over here in Germany, and the Frankfurt School belongs to the top 10 over there. So people over here know it, but it's a tiny one. Therefore, not everybody out there might know our university. I myself am into blockchain now since 2013 when I discovered Bitcoin, which became some kind of hobby in the beginning. And 5 years ago, we have set up the Blockchain Center at the Frankfurt School. And since then, we are doing with our team of 10 people full-time blockchain, crypto, DLT. But we also moved away from enterprise solutions towards decentralized systems, cryptocurrencies. That's where my heart lies nowadays with on-chain analytics and so on. And an interesting topic we are currently investigating is what kind of tokens are out there. You have utility tokens, payment tokens, investment tokens, this tokens, that tokens, and bringing some kind of structure there is one of our mission in our research. And historically, I studied a mixture between business and computer science. And from a research perspective, I did a lot of work in the area of entrepreneurship and also venture capital, always with empirical data. And now concerning CBDC, I think I would follow your explanation and your definition. Definitely, I would try to define CBDC as some kind of, let's call it, digital modern ledger where a central bank tries to re-establish the direct relation to a customer. It can be mediated through financial intermediaries such as banks or payment providers, but not necessarily. And absolutely right, CBDCs can be DLT based, but they do not have to be DLT based. They can have smart contracts, but they do not have to have a smart contract functionality. And therefore, there are good reasons why blockchain technology makes sense, but central banks around the world are also experimenting with non-blockchain CBDCs. And therefore, I think my perspective is that CBDC is only one sort of digital money of the future. There will be other sorts of money. Some of them will be fiat-based. Some of money will be not fiat-based. And for example, in Germany, we discuss it a lot, how, for example, to leverage blockchain and the euro in smart contracts, how to leverage the euro in smart contracts as soon as possible, because the ECB, yes, tries to build a CBDC, but the ECB is lacking quite strongly behind when you compare it to China. And the CBDC produced by the European Central Bank might be with us by 2026 or 2028. And this is opposed by the European industry, companies like Daimler, Bosch, Siemens, who are urgently demanding a digital currency. So there needs to be other forms of the digital euro for these years, because the CBDC is a big project, and apparently the ECB is not the fastest organization out there.
Great. Thank you for the three of you introducing yourselves. And we also have Richard Brown joining us, who's the founder of Scurf as well. Rich, if you want to just give a quick intro too.
Sure, I'll make this super brief. Richard Brown, co-founder of Scurf, most recently head of community at MakerDAO. If I have any experience that's relevant to this conversation, it is that we produced a stablecoin, and there's some obvious similarities between that and some of the proposals for CBDCs. I'll be co-moderating with Eugene, and as I'm a neophyte in the space, I'm looking forward to the conversation, but I don't think I'll have much to add, but I'm looking forward to it. Thank you, Eugene.
And so to get us started, I kind of want to follow up on the kind of definitions that you all laid out and zooming in on that idea for a moment, because I think trying to create a baseline of sort of what is a CBDC in relation to, does it need to be using a DLT or smart contracts or some of these other, blockchain technical components or not? And really thinking, I know, Philip, you also mentioned the idea of hybrid CBDCs when we were getting started at the beginning of this. So I guess, as an immediate question, Philip, do you mind just mentioning what you mean by hybrid CBDCs, what those are, and then we'll kind of springboard into what we see as the minimum design requirements for something to be a CBDC versus another type of tool that central banks might be able to have at their disposal?
Yeah, exactly. So there are multiple design options out there for CBDCs. Typically, you call it direct CBDC if we as citizens have direct access to the central bank, but this would require the central bank to really do IT. It also would require the central bank potentially to run an online app, like a smartphone app, to give me access to the euro or the US dollar. And I think central banks are not the right organizations to supply such IT. Therefore, the topic of hybrid CBDCs popped up. This means that the central bank is supplying the money originally, but it also relies on existing banks and payment providers to process these payments, to also onboard customers, to do KYC processes and AML checks. So this way you have a multi-tier system with the central bank in the background and some banks and payment processes in between. And the most important point here is that the central bank is supplying the money originally with inflation, without inflation, it doesn't matter, but it's supplying the money. And the money can then be taken up by banks and be forwarded to us as citizens, but also to companies and so on. And most important on this point is that there are also payment processors such as credit cards and banks who are then themselves supplying citizens and who are also supplying companies like Bosch, Daimler, Siemens, all these companies, they also need cash for their payments. And here I think it's very important that the central bank is not necessarily always bridging the entire line from a central bank to the citizens, but that it supplies money which can also then be used by other payment processors who then themselves make money available to the capital market, to the industry, to the upcoming economy of things, and so on. And that's why the topic of hybrid CBDCs could potentially make sense. And the last point I would like to make, in Germany, we have this discussion going up on how what we can do to supply companies with some kind of digital currency, with a digital euro. And here, for example, banks are developing payment adapters, which are sitting in between their legacy payment systems and smart contract systems, and they are reconciling this blockchain. They are trying to reconcile the blockchain system and the balances there with the money in legacy payment infrastructures in the bank accounts, and these payment adapters are then trying to synchronize the legacy world with the modern blockchain-based payment infrastructures.
Great. Ariel, did you want to jump in?
I do. I just really appreciate Philip's perspective about this possibility of a hybrid system. And I think it's important to recognize we sort of live in that system already, at least in most advanced economies, right? Where central banks provide physical currency that are used directly by retail customers, but they also provide reserves indirectly to the commercial banking system, who then supply their own form of private money supported by those reserves to private customers. And I think what Philip's describing is that the role of these banks may look very different when the central bank issues its own digital medium of exchange that is in principle accessible by customers, that maybe they're platform providers of some way to give a better IT experience, better access to central bank currency than just creating their own private monies. And I think that tension is an interesting one. And I think the big challenge from a central banking perspective of thinking about creating a digital currency is exactly the fact that right now the intermediaries play two different roles. They're payment processors, but they're also the people who extend credit, the institutions responsible for extending credit. And so, the big debate in the economics literature right now about CBDC has really been focusing on disintermediation. The idea that if you give retail customers direct access to the central bank to store their savings, will they no longer save in the commercial banking system? And I think that's why in advanced economies, you're seeing a push for some kind of hybrid approach to make sure that we can leave resources in the banking sector to keep extending credit. Because I don't think central banks are interested in using these deposit reserves to extend credit themselves. And so that's why I think Philip's perspective is a very interesting and useful one. The question is just, will the role of these intermediaries change if we create this new kind of digital medium?
Yeah, of course. And Andrew, did you want to jump in here as well?
Yeah, so I like the kind of framing of your question as what would be a minimum viable CBDC, or what's the minimum amount of blockchain technology that could be added to it and still call it something blockchain based or a digital currency. And so, I mean, one thing that I would, mention is that I think it's unlikely that you would have CBDCs built on top of a public blockchain, for example, or built on top of proof of work, anonymous consensus systems, for example. It's quite more plausible that it would be some sort of consortium consensus protocol, or even something that doesn't even resemble a consensus protocol and is essentially centrally operated and looks a lot like an ordinary database system. I could give some examples of potential technical crypto benefits that you might get even in an essentially centrally administered database that I think still are very much kind of responsive to the things that are desirable about cryptocurrencies and blockchain. So the example that I will give is the idea of auditability and transparency for records. So to the extent that people are interested in being able to audit from a public viewpoint, otherwise opaque systems of how much money is being printed or how it's going around. Some of the kind of technical toolkits in blockchains like hash-based data structures and commitments, for example, could be used to essentially make a public account record of all of the main movements or changes to parameters or changes to interest rates or other kinds of things that might change over time. And some of the technology that blockchains use today in the cryptocurrency world, like zero-knowledge proofs, could be a really good fit for that as well. Like you might be able to provide a very good open transparency record that's essentially a proof that a certain policy has been abided by the central bank or by the member banks. You'd get some cryptographic proof that the rules that were set were followed to a T. And that's something that's new. I think right now in an opaque central database system, all you can do is take the administrator's word for it. Cryptocurrencies show that there are, some alternative approaches that could be better than that. So even in a world where it's low, to say nothing of the programmability frameworks like smart contracts or of the distributed trust like consensus protocols, even if nothing else, I could imagine CBDCs incorporate some of the cryptography components that blockchains use for better auditability.
Yeah, and I appreciate what was mentioned so far, especially in terms of many of the conversations from pure, DeFi protocols or anyone that's purely in the blockchain space is just disintermediating the existing financial system. But then if a central bank deploys this technology, there's the added dimension of, well, how do we actually keep the stakeholders in the loop and as part of this new future and not disintermediate them away? So that was just an interesting thread that was mentioned there. But Rich, did you want to jump in and mention something?
Sure. There's some interesting things to unpack here. So it's the blockchain space sort of disintermediates, and then the banks or central banks issue CBDCs, and then they re-intermediate themselves. But the distinction that DLT is not a given. It's more of the paradigm and the assumptions that come along with this new sort of blockchain world that we live in, that the banks are now competing against the private sector, which is offering programmability and greater audit trails and perhaps more responsiveness to transactions. So it's the banks waking up to this new world that there's expectations that they will provide platforms. And so does that turn traditional banking into more of a fintech model where the banks are the settlement layers or the token minters, and normal banks that we're familiar with become fintech platforms? Is that the new world that we're looking at?
Philip, I know you had your hand raised. I don't know if you want to respond to that one or follow up on a previous thread.
Well, I think that's a very, very interesting thought. Like doing a finance platform and basically providing access to money could also be other monies, it doesn't need to be one currency, it can also be foreign currencies and so on. Makes extremely much sense for a bank. And I think the governments around the world, they will always want to have organizations in place, such as banks, who are doing identification of customers, who are doing AML checks and so on. And I think if you are seeing a world where governments are requiring this, somebody has to do it. And I think this is a task which is basically, as in the past, also loaded onto existing financial intermediaries, even if potentially in the future you are taking the possibility of providing loans away from banks. But I would like to add one more point to what Andrew has said. I think one of the very interesting point of blockchain technology, which very often is not really understood, is that you have one ledger and you have multiple assets on top of the ledger. You see this very nicely happening in the Ethereum world with DeFi, right? But in case we are talking about money and central banks of the past, then the ECB and the Fed and other central banks around, they are simply operating their silo, and they don't really care what's happening with the euro or to the euro or with the US dollar. So they are simply supplying the euro, the dollar, and that's their silo, right? But if you are doing transactions, security transactions in the capital market, in case you're purchasing a product or a service from an industrial corporation, then you are giving money and you're taking something. So there is a give and take taking place, and this give and take in the capital market is operated by clearing houses, right? And once you have a blockchain system which is token based, and you can have the euro, the dollar, securities and other forms of assets on top of one and the same platform, then you can get rid of clearing houses, because the clearinghouse function is then done and executed by smart contracts. That's exactly why DeFi works so extremely well, because you don't have clearinghouses in forms of organizations doing this, but you simply have smart contracts. And this is an angle in my mind where blockchain technology for CBDCs really, really makes sense. But central banks around the world have to accept that they in the future not simply operate their silo of money, but they are deploying some kind of currency on one ledger where potentially there could be other assets as well, because only if you have a multi-asset platform, then you can leverage smart contracts, settlement by smart contracts, and then you can get rid of clearinghouses with all the efficiencies and costs and time and insurances and risks and so on, which you then do not have anymore once clearinghouses are not needed anymore. I think that's a very important point, which is very often, not fully understood.
Yeah, and that also generally makes me wonder about the importance of how much pre-planning and standardization needs to be done to enable interoperability on a global scale versus how much, as with many crypto projects, that we'll build first and figure out the details later around some of these things. But Ariel, I know you wanted to jump in.
Well, I just wanted to raise that there are risks of interoperability across currencies, and making currencies very easily tradable on the exact same platform jointly with, say, goods or services, capital being traded, creates risks for independent control of monetary policy. And so we could see resistance to this usage, as Philip's describing, of a central bank digital currency where you're creating a single platform. And there's some academic research already showing this, of what do global digital currencies imply for risk of independent monetary policy. I did want to follow up on one of Andrew's points, though, about using the underlying technology features of blockchain in a CBDC, perhaps in a centralized ledger way. And what I thought was fascinating of Andrew's perspective is that CBDC could be used as a way to gain transparency into monetary policy. The flip side perspective is the ability of a central bank to gain more transparency into the use of its money by its retail customers. And that creates an interesting tension of where is the real value in additional information? Is the additional information getting transparency in what the central bank is doing in terms of monetary policy, or gaining information into how users use currency? And we've seen this in private institutions already. We've seen innovations in the private payment space, say Venmo trying to gain more information, more data about its users' transaction records, thinking that data is valuable. So I wonder if CBDC could also offer some value in terms of generating more data about how customers use a given currency, and whether that would improve monetary policy or not. The tension there, of course, is perhaps consumers, retail customers don't want to give all that data away to their government. Certainly in the private digital currency space, that's one of the big concerns of why we want cryptocurrencies, perhaps, as opposed to central bank currencies. So I think that creates an interesting tension about how do we design central bank digital currencies in a useful way that will actually be adopted privately. I view it as, we usually think more information is a good thing. So, in today's world, especially in the US, we're seeing this advanced opening of the macro economy, and we're seeing lots of choke points in different consumer goods, and that's leading to very confusing perspectives on what's happening to overall prices, which is the key objective of the central bank. One of their two key objectives is to manage overall prices. Would having big data on a CBDC improve that in some meaningful way or not? I think that's the perspective I was trying to question, that perhaps the CBDC gives them more information. does it come with other costs? And one of the costs, there's a very old debate about kind of discretion versus commitment in monetary policy. And Andrew is saying perhaps we want to tie the central bank's hands, tie them to the mast to pursue their policy, but maybe that's costly because it doesn't let them react in the ways where discretion could be valuable. So I don't have concrete answers, Richard, for you, but I think that's sort of the tension I was trying to get at.
So I think there's a very big risk of privacy falling to the wayside. And so I want to try to give a perspective here that really comes from, we worked through some of this in that CBDC design choices paper. And really the insight is just to recognize how open-ended the design